All right. Hello and welcome to the 2024 SPS Symposium for the interns. I'm the Associate Director for the SPS Student Engagement at AIP. First, I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to AIP, all the SPS staff, from all the mentors at the host sites, donors, as well as SPS friends. Your unwavering support ensures the success and growth of this program, enriching the lives of each intern. Most importantly, I would like to acknowledge and thank each intern here today. You are the true backbone of this program, bringing it to life with your unique contributions. Whether you're working in science policy, communication, AI, research, education, outreach, or even the science of dragonflies. You found ways to connect, learn from one another, and most importantly, build a sense of community. These connections will extend far beyond today, creating lifelong bonds. From the very beginning, each of you have shown remarkable self-advocacy and mutual support. You've navigated challenges and with resilience and have embraced every opportunity presented to you. Despite any setbacks or triumph, your perseverance and dedication is truly inspiring. And I'm incredibly proud of each of you. Today, we will witness only a fraction of the extraordinary work the interns have achieved this summer. After the presentations, I encourage you to get to know the interns personally. I encourage you to engage with them, read their blogs, and talk to them. Their passion and potential will undoubtedly ignite your excitement for the future of the physical sciences and our future world leaders. To the interns, I challenge you to continue supporting one another beyond this program. You never know when you'll become an invaluable resource for one another, whether it's a source of comfort or career guidance. At the end of the day, the community you've built this summer will always be a pillar of support. Be proud of the connections that you've made, the skills that you've developed, and the impact you've created. These 10 weeks are more significant than you may realize, and I look forward to seeing your continued success. Everyone, please join me in congratulating our interns and their accomplishments. Now, I have the distinct honor of introducing our keynote speaker. He is an internationally renowned astrophysicist, inventor, actor, author, veteran, science TV personality, and global education advocate with a distinguished career in academia and science research. And that's only to name a few. Many of you may recognize him as the past president for the National Society of Black Physicists, a special contributor for ABC News, the Science Channel's How the Universe Works, or as the Baconeering judge on the Netflix series Baking Impossible. Without further ado, please welcome Dr. Hakeem Oluseyi.
I'm always impressed when someone can pronounce my last name. All right. Congratulations to all of you. That's really sincere and heartfelt because you have embarked on this scientific journey, which is a great adventure. Let me tell you, I started my physics journey back in 1989. I was brought to MIT with a group of students, and what's crazy is one of them, I met these two guys who were really good friends, and now both of them are department chairs, right? So I get to graduate school, and I meet a buddy. We play basketball, but he's great at physics. Today, he's the head of Berkeley's Center for Quantum Computing, right? And so these people that you see around you, you guys are going to be the leaders of the scientific world tomorrow. It might sound crazy today, right? Because when I was, when I had that realization that all my friends and I from my 20s are now running things in the world, I thought, wow, back in the day they had Einstein and Fermi and Dirac and Nancy Grace Roman. Now it's us. Humanity is doomed, right? But we make it happen. We make it work. And so, people talk to you a lot about physics and, how to make it happen for yourself as an undergraduate, how to get in graduate school, how to do those things. I'm going to talk to you about the perks of being a physicist, because it did not turn out what I expected it to be. It turned out to be much more amazing. You know what? I meant to turn on a timer. Let me know when I hit my 10 minutes. All right. It turned out to be a much more amazing experience than I ever could have anticipated. First of all, like you, I'm guessing, I was passionate about the universe. I say it in past tense, but I still am, right? Understand the universe, right? Passion. But at the same time, there were economic realities. I needed to live indoors and eat. And so for me, physics was, my pathway to doing that at above minimum wage, all right? Buy my book, A Quantum Life, My Unlikely Journey from the Street to the Stars. Wait a minute. That was actually a joke. Because I'm like, I'm selling my book while I'm giving a talk. You're not supposed to do that? All right. So let's get some of the perks, all right? I've been to 44 countries at this point in my life. Guess how many of those trips I paid for? 0, right? That's you too. One thing, so I grew up in socioeconomic lower class of America. And a magic thing happens when you get your PhD, all right? So suddenly now, you walk into a company, you're invited into the president's office, right? So you get to meet all of the leaders in various walks of life, right? You get to meet lots of, I'm such a nerd, when I meet a Nobel Prize winner, it's like I'm meeting Brad Pitt, right? Or somebody whose equations I've used, Zeldovich. Oh my God, the soon you have Zeldovich effect, right? I get so excited. But you get to meet all of these heroes, right? When you're becoming current in your field and you're reading all these papers, you see those names, and then one day you get to meet them. They're your colleague and your competitor. Not only that, right? Everybody likes scientists. So you're always welcome, right? You're always welcome everywhere. You're always, you sit around a room with amazing people. One day I was in South Africa. I was sitting around a table. There was Gugu Zulu, the only African who had ever won whatever you call major race car stuff. I don't know what the name for that is, right? He had done that. He's passed away since. He died climbing Mount Kilimanjaro. There was this South African guy who had reached the top of Everest more times than anyone. I think the only African to do it, and many other people. And guess who everybody thinks the coolest cat in the room is? The astrophysicist, right? Not before meeting you, right? Not saying, oh, Hakeem, you're cool. No, they just hear astrophysicist or physicist, and they're like, dude, let me talk to you. I'll give you another example. I got to spend a day before he passed away with Chadwick Boseman, all right? The Black Panther. Yeah, we had a movie deal together. But when he passed, Universal was like, no, thank you, Hakeem. We were here for Chad, not you. So it was for my book. I got a new movie deal now with Oprah and De Niro. So what happens is, I'm meeting with him, and then we go to this event. It's the day before Infinity War was coming out. He's like, oh, I got to go do this event for Infinity War. You want to come with? I'm like, hell yeah. And so I go, and the second we get into the building, it was the El Capitan Theater, Chad goes, hey, this is Hakeem. He's an astrophysicist. And Winston Scott, the big dude, King of the Jabari, he's like, word? And then he's like, he just starts asking me all these questions, right? Another day, I get a call. They're like, yeah, we're organizing this thing in a prison. They requested you. And I'm like, that's supposed to make me want to go? Like, no. But it turned out to be an amazing day. It was back in 2013. You can look it up on Google. I did a little talk about infinity in 3 minutes. But the prisoners, after I do the talk, the prisoners were all like, yo, word, let me tell you about. I'm like, dude, you're a murderer. But, man, go spend a day in prison. It's eye-opening, like traveling. Anyway, the point is that this is an amazing field that you've gotten into. You're clearly all amazing people. I just looked at the little stuff that you guys did. You're so impressive. You're dressed so amazingly. I used to wear ties and stuff too. But, once I got sufficiently old, I'm like, I have a really bad skin condition, right? So I pay a cost for wearing a tie. So I just stopped. No, it's true. Read my book. It's I have a horrible case of atopic dermatitis. I literally have to slather steroids on myself every day to keep from like, I got kicked out of the Navy for it. So, you know, they used to not allow you in the Navy. Is this TMI? I'm entertaining the young ones, you guys. All right. So they stay awake that way. But I forgot where I was going. It's a cool field. It's an amazing life. And if you keep on your path, and what I want to say is it does get rough at times, right? What we do is hard. And all the easy stuff has been done. So, you know, it's really hard. And so one thing I want to encourage you to do is when times get tough, stick with it. If it's for you, right? I mean, sometimes, you know, you realize it's not what I thought it was. But times do get tough, times do get hard, and there is a world of people who are out here. If you reach out to people for help, there's always somebody who's willing to help you. And as an older person, when you meet a young person who's enthusiastic about what it is that you do, you love it. You love those young people and you really want to help them. So, you know, if you need like notes, I'm on social media, contact me. Follow me on social media. Instagram. Does Twitter still exist? I'm mostly on Instagram. But yeah, you know, it gets tough. Stick with it, and it'll be well worth it. And also remember that, you know, you see these examples of what the career is, how the career develops. What you have is something, what you have in hand once you complete your education is something that is very versatile, and you can make it what you want to make it. I literally have like 6 careers going on simultaneously that are very different one from the other, right? And, you know, a lot of it I keep secret, most of it, because it's criminal. But the, but I'm joking. I'm not a criminal anymore. So, hang in there, guys. Read the book. I was a criminal, but not anymore. All right, not in the 21st century. So definitely, guys, your presentations, I'm sure they're going to be amazing. Always believe in yourself. Stick with it. And I did my first one in 1989. How many years ago was that? 35, 45, 75? Like, it was a long time ago. I could not see today, all right? And I'm telling you that your tomorrows are going to be so amazing through this world of making it happen, because that's what we do as physicists. We make it happen. It's like, let's make this impossible measurement. But to do that, we're going to have to invent some new technology that is impossible to invent. And then you do it, and you do both, and you discover things that no one else has seen before, and that is amazing. And you will hear every other person saying this. The actual joy of your career is working with younger people and helping them to fulfill their dreams. So I have 10 minutes of your time. Reach out to me. I answer everybody. If you need help, I'm here for you. And typically that means I'll put you in touch with somebody who really can help you. All right? Thank you all so much for having me.
All right. Let's give it up for our first presenter, Mujtaba. He is our APS Innovation Intern.
Hello, everybody. My name is Mujtaba Khalid. I'm an incoming junior studying electrical engineering at the University of California, Irvine, and I am the American Physical Society, or APS's Innovation Intern. I'd like to say thank you to Kayla, Michaela, Alejandro, and anyone else who helped organize this summer's internship program. And thank you all for being here today. It means a lot that you came to listen to our presentations. This summer, I was tasked with helping the innovation team, where I worked with my mentor, Tremaine Britton, as well as Tessa Lewis and Catherine Walters-Conti. So shout out to them for taking me under their wings and guiding me through the summer. APS is dedicated to advancing innovation by empowering its members to explore the forefront of their respective research areas and adopt cutting-edge strategies for design and project management. By providing resources, support, and opportunities for collaboration, we enable our members to push the boundaries of what is possible. We foster an environment where creativity and innovation thrive, ensuring that our members stay ahead of the curve and continue to make significant contributions to their fields. The 2 projects I worked on this summer were the Innovation Fund and the Simons Travel and Professional Development Awards. Firstly, The Innovation Fund was established in 2019 by APS to advance collaborative projects that align with its mission and support its values. The 2024 Innovation Fund application cycle is specific to the International Year of Quantum Science and Technology, or IYQ. Applicants must go through a pre and full proposal stage where their applications are reviewed in depth by both the innovation team and a panel of other APS staff. Part of my role was to read over proposals and provide feedback to my mentor in the review panel to further realize potential impacts and challenges of projects. I also spent time analyzing proposal scoring and comments given by the review panel to further grasp each proposal's content and to help them make a more objective decision. Reviewing these proposals helped me realize that a well-written proposal is not everything. It must also be impactful to the community being served and executable. The main objective of this year's Innovation Fund was to find projects that share knowledge and education about quantum science, its benefits for society and the planet, its connections to history, its importance for the future, and career opportunities in this area. We also wanted proposals to raise awareness about the importance of quantum science and technology and the need to invest in education, research, and development infrastructure. This will also help address critical gaps. This will also help address the critical gap in activities and initiatives that promote the global understanding of quantum physics. There will be up to 5 grants awarded, each at a maximum of $50,000. In 2023, the Innovation Fund underwent a comprehensive program review. One key outcome of this review was to highlight the benefits of our projects to society and the physics community. To achieve this, we must gather detailed information about the project teams and participants. This is done through impact assessment, which I've been completing with Dr. Diana Sachin-Pizzitti. I've compiled a list of email addresses of professors, lecturers, and all other physics staff at several universities so that APS can conduct surveys, interviews, and focus groups to further assess the Innovation Fund's impact and its continuity. Diana also had me participate in a Think Aloud interview where she had me go through a survey and asked for my feedback on its structure, content, and how engaging it would be for college students and faculty. I expressed that shortening the survey and giving the option of multiple choice and free response answers would allow people to express their opinions more deeply. My second project was the Simons Travel Award. This program awards $8,400 to faculty members, primarily at undergrad and minority-serving institutions who would otherwise have limited access to travel and professional development support. These funds can be used by the faculty or staff member, their students, or their postdoctoral researchers to support research collaborations and participate in professional development activities. Awards will be directed toward full-time, US-based or international faculty or instructional staff in non-doctorate granting physics departments, minority-serving institutions, or staff and faculty currently in non-tenure track positions. Applicants must not have any major funding, including travel awards, at the time of submission. And like the Innovation Fund, we are looking for relevant, impactful, and feasible proposals. A realistic travel plan that includes high-impact collaboration opportunities in research or teaching, or can consist of one or several travel opportunities that will advance the proposer's stated goals. Working on these projects, I've learned how to objectively assess proposals based on their impact and relevance rather than just how well written they are. I've learned how to juggle deadlines and manage multiple assignments at once. But most importantly, I've learned that it's okay to ask for help when you're struggling and you think that you have too many things on your plate. I'd like to say thank you to my mentor, Tremaine, for helping me this summer and letting me know from day one that she was there for any advice or guidance that I needed. And with that, I conclude my presentation. Thank you all for attending.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yes, if there are any questions, I can pass the mic around, and then can ask. Yep. I gotta work out.
Get your steps in.
Awesome talk. Quick question. So if you could go back in time and tell yourself 2 months ago one piece of advice before you started, what would it be?
Thank you.
Take advantage of all the opportunities given to you. I think that there were a lot of opportunities that I unfortunately didn't take advantage of. Like my mentor, she My mentor set up a lot of different meetings for me with various staff in AIP and APS, and while I did take advantage of some of those opportunities, there were definitely more that I could have. So I'd say to anyone who's thinking about this internship program, just take advantage of every opportunity given to you.
Thank you. Anybody else? I have a few. I think one of the missions or visions of SPS is to amplify, the voice of students. I'm wondering, what do you want to bring back to your department or to the next step in your career based on this experience you just had here?
Honestly, I think inclusivity. I want to be able to involve everyone in my department. I want everyone to have equal opportunities and to know about all the opportunities available to them. Because I think sometimes when you think that there's not a lot of stuff available to you, you may not try as hard as you could. You may not go after everything that's within your reach. So I think just including everyone in my department, whether it's physics, engineering, I'm an engineering major, so I think that including everybody and making sure that everyone has access to all the same opportunities.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks for your talk. What was the most interesting thing you found when you were doing your impact assessments of the proposals?
So my role in the impact assessment, I didn't really find too much because it's still actually an ongoing process. So right now we've just sent out a bunch. We're still compiling a list of emails to send surveys to. But one thing that I've learned, honestly, working on both of these awards, is I really appreciated how much they care about serving underserved communities, minorities, and communities. So I think APS makes a big emphasis on that, and that's a big part of their mission and values. So I think that that's one thing I've definitely appreciated while working here.
Good. Thank you. I have more questions, but I'll get you later.
Awesome. Thank you. Please give it up for Muchaba one more time. Awesome. Let's welcome our APS Careers intern, Charles.
Hi, everybody. As Kayla said, my name is Charles. I'm the APS Careers Intern, and today I'll be talking to you about my work refreshing the APS physicist profiles. So we're going to have 4 sections to the presentation today. First one's going to be talking about the physicist profiles themselves, and then we're going to go through a few different examples, and then I'm going to talk about the filtering process that I've been working to implement, and then we'll move on to how the work needs to continue now that the summer's over. So to start, I want to open with a question for everybody. I'd like to see a show of hands. How many of you are working in the career you thought you'd be working in when you would be in this internship? So when you were about 20 years old. Can I see a show of hands? Oh, 1. Okay, that's good. That's good. So part of this project is focusing on the 99% of us that are in this room that don't know where we're going. I'm so happy that you found yours, though, because if I had that right now, I'd be set. So essentially, a physicist profile is an article that talks about a person's early career and their education and their life experience to better teach people about the opportunities that are around them. So the main thing that this covers is these 4 sections here. So we talk about why you got into physics and the reasons for pursuing a physics degree, whether that's just a bachelor's or bachelor's and a master's or bachelor's and PhD, or maybe you got a bachelor's in some kind of arts and then you go and get a PhD in physics, right? Whatever it is, the goal is to create an article similar to this one here and kind of create a resource for students to learn about these opportunities that they might not otherwise be able to learn about. And one of the main reasons for this is that a lot of the people that have a lot of life experience that students are surrounded by are professors. Most professors have not been in industry. I've got a couple, and they've got wonderful, wonderful advice for me, but a lot of them are like, if I ask them a question about a career outside of academia, not getting much out of them. So this resource here exists to provide that gap, bridge that gap for the students that are looking for something outside of academia or the people immediately around them. And then the next thing here is using physics. So this talks about how the people, the physicists in these profiles, are using the physics that they learned in their undergraduate or graduate degrees to do this unusual career. Sometimes it's a normal career, but I like to highlight the unusual careers today. And that could be anything from hard skills or soft skills or anything in between. And then these last two sections, advice for students and interesting highlights, are some of my favorites. Advice for students is really just anything that the physicist thought was important to communicate to a young audience that's trying to start a career or switch careers or do anything adjacent to that. And then the interesting highlights are just kind of cool facts to humanize the physicists that are in these profiles and make them seem more like people that you could interact with. So this first one here, this is Jan. This is someone I interviewed this summer. I had a wonderful conversation with him over Zoom. We talked for like an hour. He told me about his career, told me about his life. He loves windsurfing. He currently has a PhD, so he's kind of similar to the exposure that a student might have access to from a professor and that kind of whole academia experience. After his PhD, though, he was not interested in continuing to do academia. He wanted to be in the lab. He wanted to continue doing work in that sense. And so he went to go work for ESI, if any of you know what that is. And then ESI got acquired by MKS, and now he is a fellow at MKS. He loves his job. He gets to work in the lab. He works on a bunch of different projects. And this was a pretty easy one to reach out to for me because my mentor already had a connection to him through the APS mentoring program. But essentially, we talked for an hour. He tells me about his life, about all the different things he's done. And it's a little bit of a mess because conversations are never organized in the way into those four categories, right? I try and do my best to organize them that way, but it was a big struggle this summer to take this hour-long conversation, then figure out how to turn it into like a usable transcript, and then pull quotes out of it, pull ideas out of it, consolidate it down into an article that fits maybe on here, right? And then make sure that it's communicating the things that not only he wants to communicate, but APS wants to communicate, and things that are going to be useful for people that are looking to switch careers, right? I could talk about all the stuff that he does on like a day-to-day basis as a fellow at MKS, but that's not really helpful for me as like a 21-year-old that's about to graduate in a year, right? Like, that's cool, but I want to know, how did you get like your first job? How did you get your second job? Was it networking? Is it something that you did in your undergraduate? Is it something you did in your PhD? What set you apart to get you to where you are today? So here we have December Martin. December Martin is very different from Jan. They both work in industry, but December only has a bachelor's. Once December had graduated from her bachelor's, she did not want to go back into academia. And she ended up going in a million different careers. And originally she was doing some engineering for medical devices and things like that. And now she's working at SOFAR Ocean, building these buoys that have a bunch of sensors on them that allow SOFAR to essentially evaluate the health of the ocean. And the ocean is something that she's had a passion for a lot of her life, but she only really discovered that she could work in that passion after she had beat breast cancer, which is a large part of this article. It's not a large part, but I didn't want it to like overcome the profile, but it was really big for her. And she had been working in medical technologies and things like that for years. But then she got breast cancer and was done. And so it was an interesting struggle to be able to take that profile and consolidate it down into something more cohesive that kind of walked you through her motivations for a career. Here, this is Colonel John Dirk. Maybe one of the most entertaining profiles, most entertaining interviews that I did. It was a big contrast between what it sounds like when you imagine a colonel talking to you. It's like very strict and like, right? But he was talking about like free body diagrams and like kinematics, and just very entertaining. And there's no one else on the careers website that has a profile like this. Currently, he worked as a fighter pilot, which is very unusual for someone with a physics degree. And he graduated from the Naval Academy. And again, he only has a bachelor's. So he's working in these high-level positions. He was working in the Pentagon for a while, doing like some advising things. And so, yeah, lots of interesting profiles. Then we've got this here, profile filtering. There are about 70 profiles right now. Keem, you've got one. I don't know if you know that. No. Okay, perfect. And with 70 profiles, it's difficult to parse through all of them and find the things that you want to find. So what I did is I went through most of the profiles, and I attached a physics subfield for where they studied. I attached demographic information for the identities that they identify with, and then I attached their current position. So you can go and check boxes on the side once the website's set up to accept that and find profiles much more easily. Now, there's a few things that remain. Profiles still need to be posted on the website. It's kind of a lengthy review process. A few profiles still need to be finished because I had an interview earlier this week. Cannot make a profile that quickly. And then the APS website just got refreshed. It's a beautiful website, but the physicist profiles page does not accept the filters yet. So we still have to work on that. The filters are ready though, as soon as that changes. Finally, thank you all for listening. Special thanks to my mentor, Midhat. Couldn't be here today because she lives in California. But yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you, Charles. That was really amazing. Will anybody like to ask any questions?
So awesome resources. You obviously learned a lot by going through their profiles. What's the best way to get lots of students to see these profiles that might not otherwise?
Yeah, that's a really good question because the careers team, sadly, is, I mean, maybe not sadly, it's not their specialty, but their focus is not advertising the material, right? They make the material and it's wonderful. There's so many things. So that would be maybe like a larger question for APS. I think one of the best ways would probably to do something on Instagram, which was another small part of this project. The interview that I had, the most recent one, I recorded some clips of her just talking about her career in a smaller format to hand over to the social media team to get something to communicate quickly. Hey, this is Zara. She does this and this and this, and you might want to go check out this profile. So it's a work in progress. It's definitely difficult trying to reach a bunch of young people that maybe aren't looking for this type of thing. But yeah, very good question.
Anybody else? Kayla, you have one? No? I do have one. What are the, maybe it wasn't one thing, but what is a one thing that you identified across the people you interview that sort of define that or personify that physicist? Or like, what do you think that degree did on people that allowed them to have these very awesome journeys and resilience and all of that?
Yeah, I think the main thing that I saw between all the profiles was just a genuine curiosity for the world around them. They were all doing something that was trying to further their knowledge in some subject. So could be anything from like working on like optics equipment, right? Like very traditional kind of physics focused stuff. But then there were also people that were doing like outreach, right? They were doing TV shows and setting up grants and funds and things like that. And they were trying to figure out the best way to do that. How do I reach the most people? So I think the main thing is just this resourcefulness and this like willingness to keep going.
Awesome. Give it up for Charles. If we can bring it back to our next presenter. So let's all welcome our AIP Mather Public Policy intern, Jenna.
Thank you, Kayla. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jenna Mastropolo, and I'm the Mather Public Policy Intern at the Office of Advanced Manufacturing at NIST. And this is just an 8-minute presentation of my very long report on the intersection of artificial intelligence and intellectual property in manufacturing. So artificial intelligence, or AI, has a huge potential for efficiencies in supply chains and manufacturing that affect all U.S. critical technologies. And I'm sure you're all familiar with ChatGPT or other AI models that simulate human intelligence, but the practice of using AI in manufacturing is to analyze large data sets, simplify and scale trends, and uncover insights for data analysts. So AI in the manufacturing industry is actually crucial to improving productivity, efficiency, and decision-making processes. And Industry 4.0 is the next phase in the manufacturing industry, and it's driven by trends including the rise of data and connectivity, analytics, human-machine interaction, and the improvements of robotics. So advanced manufacturing relies heavily on proprietary data. And then central to adoption of AI in manufacturing is the treatment of intellectual property, or IP, in AI. And IP will be crucial for companies to protect their innovations and maintain a competitive advantage in the manufacturing industry. So the main question we can ask is, how do we handle IP within AI? So in the federal policy area, IP is vital to this implementation. And on October 30th of 2023, President Biden signed Executive Order 14110, titled the Executive Order on the Safe, Secure, and Trustworthy Development and Use of Artificial Intelligence. And it's the most comprehensive guide, or it's the most comprehensive piece of governance in the US regarding AI. The order lays out guidelines, standards, and policies or best practices, for AI. And it requires multiple federal agencies to create standards, guidelines, and policies to safeguard a variety of concerns, such as risk management, critical infrastructure, and AI safety and security. And it's become the framework for the explosive growth in AI and for adoption of AI across the industry sectors. So some of these outcomes are the blueprint for the AI Bill of Rights, which are 5 guiding principles that guide the design, use, and deployment of automated systems and can impact the rights, opportunities, and access for the American public. The NIST AI Risk Management Framework was developed to better manage risks to individuals, organizations, and society associated with AI. And in April of 2024, NIST released a draft based on the framework called NIST AI 600-1, and that's to help manage risks for generative AI. And it centers on a list of 13 risks on issues such as easier access to information related to chemical, biological, radiological, or nuclear weapons. And the Defense Production Act authorizes to compel developers of powerful AI systems to report vital information, especially in AI safety test results. So as shown, policy in AI and manufacturing is vital to the country's economy and demonstrated by activities across the federal agencies. So the NSF has built 7 new AI institutes, NIST has built the AI Safety Institute, and most recently, AI for Resilient Manufacturing Institute. The Department of State has focused on AI and is the center of global technology. The Department of Energy uses AI to aid 4 key areas of grid management. The Department of Defense has the adoption of advanced AI capabilities to ensure U.S. warfighters maintain decision superiority, and the Department of Commerce has combined standards and evaluation capabilities. So under the Department of Commerce is the United States Patent and Trademark Office, or the USPTO, and one of their main priorities is to ensure that the U.S. maintains its leadership in innovation, especially in emerging technologies. And so in 2020, the USPTO issued a pair of decisions denying an AI system as an inventor on 2 patent applications. And the judgment stated that the USPTO's interpretation that an inventor must be a natural person is correct under law. So the USPTO provided a list of principles that help inform the application in AI-assisted inventions, and they're continuing to work on providing clarity for inventions, for AI-assisted inventions, and working on other key areas of IP. So some of these key areas of IP is copyright infringement for specifically of data for AI model training. So I'm sure you've seen all of these in the news, but the rise of generative AI is presenting challenging questions about the protection, liability, and enforcement of IP. So in 2023, the New York Times filed a lawsuit alleging that millions of its copyrighted works were being used to train the large language models of Microsoft's Copilot and OpenAI's ChatGPT. In 2020, Thomson Reuters sued Ross Intelligence, alleging that the AI legal research company was unlawfully copied content from Reuters' legal research platform. There's too many legal AI words in here. Getty Images brought on 12 causes of action against Stability AI, which include trademark infringement for removing watermarks and metadata, and as well as copyright infringement by reproducing Getty's copyrighted works and creating derivatives of them. So this work is also being pursued internationally. So the Zurich University Center of IP and Competition Law sets recommendations on topics such as AI authorship in patent law, AI authorship in copyright law, and rules for allocations in AI-related IP rights. The EU Act has data scraping and arguments that will come into effect, banning AI systems that contribute to facial recognition, databases through untargeted scraping of facial images from the internet, and processing personal data with AI is not prohibited under any European legislation, and using AI does not include the General Data Protection Regulation, or the GDPR. Again, there's way too many acronyms. And the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or OECD, released a report that dives into the complexities of AI's significant challenges, considering data governance and privacy. So how do federal agencies and the private sector's various activities relate to AI in manufacturing? The IOF standard provides a structured framework for the effective integration of AI and machine learning technologies into manufacturing environments. Federated learning is a way to train AI models without anyone seeing or touching your data. So it offers a way to unlock information to feed new AI applications. Data that's stored in a cloud could be vulnerable to unauthorized access or cyber attacks. And since AI algorithms are becoming more powerful, single company sharing is becoming more common and have the desire to not share their data. Human expertise is also crucial in leveraging AI effectively and would allow the manufacturers to create better products and would be another form of verification when going through the IP process. So overall, there's no really definitive answers on handling AI, even in the manufacturing industry. And so questions such as where is data traveling, how are models being trained, and what form of AI is for the general good is still being debated and resolved. And even though AI is huge in manufacturing industry, it will continue to affect not only the manufacturing industry, but also all of our lives in general. So I'd just like to thank my mentors, Susan and Robert, as well as Brad and Lisa and the rest of NIST and the Office of Advanced Manufacturing, Dr. John Mather, AIP, the Society of Physics students, my school, High Point University, for admitting me into their program, and all of my fellow interns for putting up with me through my very long 40-page report. So thank you guys. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Yeah, I got you. Oh, no, that's not a safe space. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi,
I just,
Brian.
I just had a question. What was your most surprising, or what AI capability did you find most surprising or jarring?
AI is now training AI. Exactly. It's kind of scary because you think like we put in, products or like data into AI and like generate it. Now AI is putting data into AI. It's kind of terrifying.
Hi,
Hi.
I was the Mather policy intern last year, and I worked for the House Science Committee. And I actually did my final presentation on NIST AI, RMF, and a bunch of other AI-related things. But one of the things that I realized, and kind of came up in your presentation as well, is that most of the stuff in the U.S. around AI is really just about encouraging the use of AI or helping people use it, but there still isn't like real legislation. There's executive orders that you brought up, but what's something that like you would want to see that you would think would be most useful in the like continued use of AI in American manufacturing?
I'm going to split that into two. For me, myself, I would like to see more protection on like our personal rights, because if you implement like, if I go to look up my name, it's already on the internet. It's everywhere. I mean, you look at my name, it comes up right on the Society of Physics students website, which is okay, I guess. But, so I would like to see more protection on the American people's personal data, because that is kind of scary if, you can just generate somebody through AI. Through manufacturing, I think it's really important for these inventions to see more protection on those as well. Again, they have the USPTO has the inventorship guidance for AI, and while it's helpful, it's not, I'd like to see something more with it, more of a protection based, like, hey, how can AI be, and it kind of comes in with that human expertise, like how can we verify more? So something like that, I would say.
Thank you. Anybody else in this side of the room? Questions over there? Okay.
Oh, Lord.
They're not allowed to ask questions. They can ask me anytime.
Well done. That last point, I'd love to hear you say more, because you ended the presentation with the human experience having to be part of it, and you just mentioned that in your last answer, where that idea of human expertise is going to play into this with the AI models. What did you find, and where's that impact going to be?
So I found it to be, there's not much. I feel like nowadays we kind of just, since it's new, we don't really think about it too much of, hey, maybe everything that we are implementing is not true or has already existed. Because I've looked up the executive order multiple times on ChatGPT, and it has spit out 10 different things to me. And I feel like that's the same thing with, you could look up something on ChatGPT, plug something in real quick, and it might not all be true. It might give you some things that are true, but it might not all be true. And so I think having somebody double check it would be very crucial, very, very important, especially if you're applying for a patent or copyright, trademark, any IP related thing, especially in the manufacturing industry. I mean, I don't know how to like exactly say it, and I don't want to go too far into it, but I think the human expertise will be really crucial. It's really needed, in fact, because there's a lot of things that are coming out being the same. So.
Awesome. Thank you. Give it up for Jenna. All right. So let's give our full attention to our AIP Center for History of Physics Niels Bohr Library and Archives intern, Kai.
All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kai Hassetter Habib, and as Kayla said, I was AIP Center for History of Physics and the Niels Bohr Library and Archives intern this summer. I'm also a rising junior at Princeton University studying history of science and astrophysics. So the basic layout of my presentation is first I'm going to go over the context behind my research, the research itself, and then the products that I derived from all my research. Okay, so before we begin the presentation, I want to ask you a question. When you think about the greatest physicist of all time, who comes to mind? Albert, yes, yes. But usually people will say it's Albert Einstein, Isaac Newton, Richard Feynman, James Clerk Maxwell. And the one thing that is across the board with all of these people is that they're straight white men. Very rarely do physicists of marginalized identities come into mind when we think about the greatest physicists of all time. And within that, there are very rarely do LGBTQ plus physicists come to mind. And this tension is exactly what I found myself researching. So why is this important, you say? So earlier this summer, I read an article by Moses Rifkin, who's a high school physics teacher in Washington, and he wrote, when we teach physics, we talk about physicists. The downside to this is that, whether we realize it or not, most of us implicitly communicate to students that scientists come from one demographic group, white male Europeans, and crucially, not from others. Our students internalize this lesson. And it is no secret that physics is a field dominated by white straight men, but we also need to bring to light physicists such as Sandra Sekar, Katherine Johnson, Shirley Ann Jackson, and more importantly, we also need to bring into the fact queer physicists when we see them, because we currently face a problem in physics. So in 2022, there was a study of 324 physicists who self-identified as part of the LGBTQ plus community. In the past year, 36% of participants considered leaving their workplace due to unwelcoming environments due to their sexual orientation or gender identity. 22% said that they experienced discrimination firsthand. And within the transgender community, that statistic jumped to 49%. One half of transgender physicists said they personally experienced discrimination firsthand in the past year alone. We as a physics community need to do better. And from this, I knew from my internship I could elevate these voices and help alleviate the problem that we see in the physics community today. So this brings me to my site placement at the Center for History of Physics and the Niels Bohr Library and Archives. There we currently host oral history interview collections. We have teaching guides, and we have unfathomable amounts of archival material. But especially when we turn our attention to the teaching guides, they were created to diversify the stories we see in physics and help with underrepresentation. However, we also see a lot of issues we see in society translated into these teaching guides, especially when it comes to the issues we see with DEI, in which sometimes different minority groups tend to be overlooked. So out of the 60 teaching guides we have, only 2 focused on individuals who identified as LGBTQ+, and only 1 focused on someone with a disability. And I really wanted to take these two groups in particular, and this is not to say that other groups don't need like to be uplifted as well, but I had to be strategic as I only had 10 weeks, so I decided to focus on these two groups, and this brought me to my research. So over the course of 10 weeks, I focused on 4 people in particular. The first of these was Frank Kameny, who, if you know him, he's usually well regarded as the grandfather of the gay rights movement. He staged the first pickets in front of the White House advocating for gay rights. He served a crucial role in the declassification of homosexuality as a mental illness in 1973, and he very much advocated for the protection of sexual orientation in the workplace. However, what people usually don't know about him was that he was a well-regarded astronomer who studied under astronomers and physicists such as Cecilia Payne-Gaposchkin, Bart Bok, Eric Lindsay, and was very much well-regarded in the field of photoelectric photometry. However, because he was gay, he was fired from his federal job in 1957, I believe, thus basically ending his career, but this side of him is never really brought to light. And likewise, there's another physicist, James Pollack, and he is a pioneer. He's a powerhouse in the field of planetary science. He was Carl Sagan's first graduate student and later collaborator. He worked on studying the atmospheres of Venus and Mars, terraforming a nuclear winter, and even in 1989, he won the Gerard P. Kuiper Prize for lifetime achievement in planetary science. But what people don't realize about him was that he was also openly gay, and he did a lot of gay rights advocacy, especially with founding Homophile, which are basically early gay rights advocacy groups in the 1960s. And when he died in the 1990s, he actually left his estate to fighting homelessness and AIDS, and which disproportionately affected the queer population at the time. Then we move on to the modern side of things. So the first person I interviewed was Dr. K. Renee Horton, who's currently NASA's airworthiness deputy and previously served as the Space Launch Systems quality engineer. And she also self-identifies as someone with a hearing impairment. She's a Black woman and a non-traditional student. She served as the National Society of Black Physicists president from 2016 to 2018. And she's very much an advocate for disability rights and for especially Black women in STEM. So then the final person I interviewed was Dr. Jan Eldridge, who is the academic head of the Department of Physics at the University of Auckland in New Zealand, where she studies binary star interactions. And she actually developed a code herself to basically model these interactions in a simulation. But she's also a trans non-binary woman, and she's very much involved with DEI efforts at her university and through the Astronomical Society of Australia. So what you might notice is basically I split these into 2 components, the historic and the modern, because I inherently believe that history as a field is bifaceted. It's the past and the present. We need to document the past and rewrite the past to better reflect reality. And we also need to document the present so that when future historians look back on today, they get a complete understanding of what today is like. So the deliverables of this internship was that I either published or am in the process of publishing, because it's a very long process, the oral histories of Dr. Eldridge and Dr. Horton. I've authored several blog posts for Ex Libris Universum, which is the blog for the Library and Archives, and I'm currently writing a Physics Today article. But because I did so much research on James Pollack and Kameny, I really want to continue this, including interviewing those who knew them and synthesizing this research into larger publications, as well as continuing my interviews with scientists of marginalized identities, adding to the oral history interview collection. So thank you so much for listening to my talk, and especially thank you to Corinne and Will, my mentors, and everyone else at NBLA and CHP, including Trevor, John, and Karina, everyone at SPS, especially Alejandro, Kayla, and Michaela, all my fellow interns who have dealt with me the past 10 weeks, and everyone else who has supported me, including my 2 lovely dads who are in the audience today. questions. And if you want, feel free to reach out to me at either of those emails or at my LinkedIn. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Questions? Yeah.
Awesome work. Phenomenal presentation. So you probably learned about other people that were not in your presentation. Is there a quick anecdote or little story that you'd like to share about somebody not in your presentation?
Oh God, that's okay. Putting me on the spot. I mean, I guess the one thing I learned was about Jessica Mink, who's also another trans woman astrophysicist, in which she coined something called astrophysics privilege, where, I mean, if you've been following current politics of LGBTQ plus issues in America right now, it is not looking good for the trans population. There have been an insane number of anti-trans bills, but when we think about transphobia, a lot of times those in prominent positions such as astrophysicists don't tend to face as much backlash because they're held to such like a high esteem in comparison to, let's say, a trans person who's working in fast food or another field that's typically looked down upon, which I thought was really interesting and definitely something I think we as a physics community need to look at more. But also, then again, realizing that like 50% of trans people in physics have experienced discrimination.
Thank you. Anybody from this over there? Yeah.
Yeah, what do you think we can learn from looking at some of the successful physicists who you mentioned, kind of the stars of physics history, in the context of the societies that they lived in? So what I mean is, some of them in the current taxonomy, as you put it, were white, male European physicists, but in their time, they were from marginalized groups. So an example, Einstein. So driven out of Germany, family members were killed, came to the US. I just looked up his immigration papers. His race is listed in the US as Hebrew. Mm-hmm. His science was rejected in Europe because it was Jewish science. But he was a success in his time and subsequently. What can we learn from those examples for applying for the challenges of today?
I think especially how I look at it is that a lot of people, even if they come from what we perceive as the majority group right now, do hold a lot of identities of minority status, whether that's coming from a low-income background, even if you are white, if that's having immigrant parents, whatever. And I think holding multiple identities in tandem at the same time and recognizing the challenges one faced while also recognizing the privileges one had at the time is really important in understanding the history and also putting it in like the context of today. So it's not necessarily one or the other. I think we have to hold both privilege and oppression in the same, even in the same vein, in the same context, even if they seem paradoxical, they're really not. Yeah, and I think in general, a lot of people tend to say that, oh, if you have this identity, you don't face any challenges, and that's just not true. And I think that's something we really need to work on as a community of making space for both those who do hold privilege, but also who do face challenges.
Awesome. Ooh, one last question. Yeah.
Question, yes or no. Are you aware of or do you watch Kathy Loves Physics and History on YouTube?
I have not seen that, but I should search it up.
She's awesome. Different history, but great stuff. And I sent you an email.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Please give it up for Kai. Awesome. All right, let's give it up for our SPS SOC and American Association of Physics teacher intern, Maya.
Hello all, my name is Maya Chandler, and this summer I was an intern with the Society of Physics Students and the American Association of Physics Teachers K-12 programs. I'm a rising senior at Swarthmore College, studying biophysics with a minor in educational studies. And as context for this presentation, 5 things I love are bugs, patterns, how things move, Lego Batman, and talking about science. So the plan for this talk is going to be, I'm going to introduce the projects I did this summer, then I'm going to dive into the things that took me the most time, and then I'm going to talk about the goals I achieved. So working for 2 organizations this summer, I had a wide variety of tasks. For SPS, I designed and put together the outreach kit, so the Science Outreach Catalyst Kit, which we call the SOC. I led the interns in a public outreach at Astronomy on the Mall with thousands of attendees, where we test the demos with all the interns beforehand, and then communicated these demos to kids and adults at the event. I designed the intern shirt, which Jack over there is wearing today, and then I also made some demo videos and website demos. I also created the Physics Jeopardy for this year. The best categories were from Sonia, thank you very much, which were first names of people there are equations named after, and fun facts about physicists unrelated to physics. Did you know that Albert Einstein did not like to wear socks? Another good category that I liked was Name That Unit, where I give you SI base units and you give me fun units. So for AAPT, a lot of what I did was in preparation for the summer meeting in Boston this year. So I did a lot of advertising and prep work, so I made the K-12 track schedule and a lot of other posters. I did some research on STEM schools and cities where meetings will be held, and did research on professional learning communities. So the biggest project of the summer was this Science Outreach Catalyst Kit. It is free to SPS chapters and is a box of 3 or more demos centered around one topic. It includes a comprehensive manual with explanations for 3 age groups, so elementary school, middle school or general public, and high school, and it's for chapters to take out into the world to teach people about physics. I decided to make this year's kit about dragonflies. Why dragonflies, you ask? I think dragonflies are the most amazing creature to exist on this planet. Also, they're full of physics, so there's a lot of research going on about dragonflies' flight dynamics, especially because they're a huge inspiration for flying robots because their flight is so very efficient. People are also doing really interesting research on dragonfly coloration. This is a particularly interdisciplinary field. There's lots of chemistry, lots of biology, and obviously lots of physics. So I felt like in the dragonfly, you could touch on a lot of different aspects of physics in just one little guy, such as optics, forces, waves, and more. So what was important to me in creating this SOC? I wanted to have a variety of physics topics with different types of engagements. So presentation demos versus exploration demos with different amounts of setup required. I also wanted to have different group sizes, so a small group activity versus a large group activity, and a focus on interdisciplinary physics. I wanted the demos to be interconnected and for them to be made of easily accessible materials so they could also go on the SPS website instead of just going to chapters, so they could have a broader reach. I also wanted approval from people who worked in K-12 classrooms, so what would actually work and is pedagogically sound. So this year's kit ended up having 7 components. So first was an introduction letter with lots of additional resources. So this was videos, articles, connecting the kit to topics in biology, chemistry, engineering, mathematics, and also some things on poetry and history of physics. There were 6 demos. So one was Sight about UV light and electromagnetic waves, one on wings and waves and movement, 2 on flight, so one about gliding flight and one about vortices, one about coloration in dragonfly, about thin film interference, and one about muscles, about forces and movement. So we're going to go through all these 6 demos real fast. So for the Sight one, it was using UV beads to talk about electromagnetic radiation being a kind of wave and the different types of light in the electromagnetic spectrum. The dragonfly connection centered a discussion on the wavelengths of light that humans can't see, but dragonflies can. So lots of bugs, including dragonflies and bees, can see ultraviolet light. So this tells them where pollen is and also is used for communication within a species. This Wings demo was a 3-parter. So it included a dragonfly dance, a shaking the rope demo, and a DIY wave model, which is on this table in the front. And the physics concepts were wave phases, superposition, and constructive and destructive interference. It centered a discussion on dragonfly flight, specifically how dragonflies have the ability to modify the phasing of their wing strokes. So their front and hind wings flap at a 90-degree phase difference to increase efficiency, but flap in phase when they want more vertical force, such as during takeoff. This gliding flight activity was a more exploratory or investigative demo with paper airplanes. So we talked about forces involved in flight versus forces involved in gliding, and also how we measure glide efficiency. It talked about gliding dragonflies and why they glide, and had participants try and make paper airplanes that can glide as far as a dragonfly can. Spoiler alert, that is impossible. Some dragonfly species can glide up to 30 meters without any loss in altitude. So then it asked students to modify their paper airplanes in accordance with structural variables that influence dragonfly flight to try and make their planes fly faster. So that would be thinking about the veins and corrugation on dragonfly wings and the body proportion and their wing proportions. The next 3 demos I thought were super, super fun. This flight demo on vortices was kind of messy, so it was more investigative, spinning a paddle with dye and a cup of glycerin to see the vortices that it left behind, and talked about what is fluid dynamics and leading edge vortices. And the dragonfly connection was how do dragonflies fly? It's different to how airplanes fly, and fluid dynamics relationships. The color one talked about reflection, refraction, structural versus pigmented coloration, and of course thin film interference using a bubble. I really liked, and the dragonfly connection was how dragonflies are colored using structural coloration often. And then there was a cool extension activity involving pouring alcohol on a found object that you think is structural coloration. And this demo has a really, really strong connection to the other demos. And then there is this muscles demo, which I think most tables have in front of them at varying levels of the prototype process. And it involved types of forces and force diagrams and Newton's laws, and as a bonus, Voronoi tessellations. The dragonfly connection was the direct flight muscles of dragonflies. So each dragonfly has 2 separate wings. Each dragonfly wing has 2 separate muscles that allow them to move each wing independently and gives them lots of control about how fast they can change speed and direction. So in summary, I finished the sock, so the design is completed and all 100 boxes are packed and ready to ship. The website demos are ready to be posted with videos. Astro on the Mall and was a success, I would say. Everybody has an intern shirt. Jeopardy is done, and the summer meeting of 2024 ran smoothly, and I made lots of connections, and I finished my research on STEM schools and PLCs. So thank you very much for listening to my presentation. Extra appreciation to Michaela and Justine, my mentors, and also the AAP Intern Talks attendees at the summer meeting and this internship program, and also thank you to every dragonfly species ever. You can contact me here. This is a picture of me and the dragonfly great blue skimmer. It is 2 to 2.5 inches in length and found in lakes, ponds, and slow streams in the eastern United States. It's really cool. Thank you.
Thank you, Maya. That was great. Any questions from peers from over here?
Okay, you're not prepared for the question, but I really want to know.
Yeah.
About how fast do dragonfly wings flap?
Oh, it's much slower than a bee. It's about 10 times slower than how a bee flaps. I want to say it's on the scale of like 10 to 20 flaps per second. I think I have to fact check that though.
Can we see a demonstration of the dragonfly dance?
Absolutely. Raiden, would you like to pick a buddy? So the dragonfly dance has a bunch of students compete to say whether they can flap the most in phase or the most correctly at a 90-degree phase difference. And to make it a little more challenging, they might not be able to look at each other. So would you like this to be the most challenging back to back? Okay, back to back then. And try and flap in phase without looking at each other. And let's try a 90-degree phase difference.
Wow.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions from the audience over there? Oh, thank you. And then over here.
Thank you for your work. I loved science education, and maybe through your work there'll be more audiences for things like when Charles said, and he talked about free body diagrams, it was really exciting. Notice we didn't even flinch. Other audiences might have been like, that's exciting. So your work is going to make that more universal.
Thank you.
My question for you in all of this is, you got a chance to work through the program and with kids. When working the program with kids as you were developing it, were you able to learn from the kids as they did the activity and make some adaptations?
So I actually sent the demos to all of my cousins and then have them give me feedback, and I got a little bit of things about some wording and how to make things a little more clear in the explanations, and then also got some feedback on the diagrams I included and like using color to make those a little more clear. So that was super helpful. A lot of the feedback I got was I did this presentation at the AAPT summer meeting, and a bunch of K-12 teachers did the demos and told me how to improve some of the wording and also how to make the instructions a little more clear. So that was really awesome.
Yeah, more technical question, since the dragonflies do seem quite interesting. So if I think of birds, for example, birds come in a huge variety of sizes, and fish come in a huge variety of sizes, but it seems like dragonflies are kind of one size. So is there a reason that they've evolved to be the size that they have to optimize efficiency or something? Is there a reason that they have that size?
I'm not entirely sure why, like specifics about that size. They do come in some variety of sizes. So the smallest dragonfly that exists in the whole world has a wingspan of about 2 centimeters, so he's really small, and the largest ones have wingspans of maybe around 20 centimeters. So there is like some variation in size. I think probably some of the reason they're this small is because of them breathing through little holes in their body. So it's about how much oxygen they can get into their body. So during the Carboniferous period, when there's a lot more oxygen in the air, like prehistoric dragonflies were much bigger and had wingspans of around like 2 feet. So I think probably oxygen is the reason that they're the size they are.
Awesome. Give it up for Maya. Let's give it up for our Space Telescope Science Institute intern, Jaden.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. My name is Jaden Seacott. I'm going to be a senior this year at George Washington University, and this summer I worked with Dr. Nimisha Kumari at the Space Telescope Science Institute, specifically looking at early galaxy characteristics in the Vandals data release 4 sample. So just as a brief overview, first we're just going to go over some brief cosmic history. We're going to talk about the instrumentation that we used to look at this history, and then we're going to go into the Vandals survey specifically, and then the future directions that can come from all this work. But first, we have to get some key terms out of the way. So unfortunately, astronomy is full of a lot of like jargon. So I'm just going to go over a couple of them real quick, and then we're going to move on, get to the fun stuff. So redshift is just a stretching. Use it? Okay. Yeah. Even though I got this one? Yeah. Okay. All right. So redshift is just the stretching of light as an object moves far away from us at very high speeds. Think about it like when an ambulance passes by, and the frequency of the siren changes as it gets closer to you and then as it moves away. So we see this with light. It can tell us a lot, specifically with the spectrum. So spectrum is basically like a fingerprint for a light source. It just tells us something about the chemical and the physical composition. We use the emission and absorption lines within. And that's really how we get all of our information about astronomical sources. Main sequence, this one won't come up too much, but basically it's just a designation given for galaxies that have normal-ish star forming rates for their stellar masses. It's just like a kind of like a linear relation. And we know that a galaxy is star forming if it's on this main sequence. All right, and then magnitude is just a measure of how bright something is. We use a couple different magnitude schemes, but basically the lower the number is, the brighter it is, and that's all that really matters there. And so for cosmic history, I'm going to be very brief because it's kind of hard to condense 13 billion years into 8 minutes, so I won't go too much into it. But basically we have this Big Bang, and then the early universe starts to get filled with this neutral hydrogen, and then we have what's called the dark ages. So nothing happens for like a very long time. Stars are slowly forming, but there's no real light going on yet. And then the first stars do form. We call that cosmic dawn, and that's when these stars start to ionize all this gas, which means it's knocking electrons off of this neutral hydrogen. And then we have the first galaxies that start to form, and that's around that reionization period there. You can see on the chart. And if you're curious, as this ionization process happens, it creates this bubble of gas that expands outward, and you can see kind of a visual of that there. And as these bubbles expand outward and collide, they contribute pretty heavily to early galaxy formation and the large-scale structure of the universe, and that's what we're really interested about going forward. So this period right here, when the first galaxies start to form, that's what we want to know about. But until very recently, that period of cosmic history has been pretty inaccessible. We can't see back that far. Our instruments just aren't that good. With James Webb, we now can a little bit, but until this point, we've only had about around that cosmic noon region, which is when star formation really peaked. So if we want to study the future with James Webb, we need to know what we're looking for. And so we have these instruments that we use to do so. Hubble is maybe the most famous one. You can see even James Webb pushes much farther back towards that Big Bang. But these instruments aren't the only devices that we have to measure this. And so in the interim of prior to James Webb's deployment, we need to find other ways creatively to study this and know what we're looking for. And so the Vandal survey is one of them. The Vandal survey uses the VLT, which is creatively named the Very Large Telescope. It's housed in Chile, and that's an image of it right there. And the Vandal survey had a couple of goals. So they want to move beyond redshift determination, so not just figure out how far away it is, but actually be able to tell something about these sources. And these sources are about 2,000 galaxies, most of them star forming, either bright or faint, some of them passive as a sort of control, so we know that we're actually getting the full sample that's out there. It uses the VMOS device, which is a visible multi-spectrograph. It basically just means we're looking at multiple objects and we're going to take a spectrum, which is what we're looking for. The regions it observes, you don't really need to know a whole lot about them. Basically, though, they've been observed by Hubble and Chandra and Spitzer, so we have a good idea of what sources are out there and what targets to go after. All right, and so this is the first analysis that I was able to do of this sample. As you can see, I removed some of the outliers that were very bright or very dim that were giving us kind of some yucky data. So now we have around 2,000 total. But we wanted to take this sample and actually break it into something that we can learn from. So star-forming galaxies, what do we know about them? So James Trussler posted a paper in 2020 giving these lines that you can see here on the plot that helps delineate between star-forming, passive, and Green Valley. Green Valley is just that period right in the middle of the lines. We're not going to talk too much about it. So using those lines and a couple of other criteria, we're able to break the sample into a star-forming population and a passive population. And now remember how I said that star-forming populations should be on that main sequence? As you can see, those lines right there are 2 iterations of the main sequence, and it's perfectly in line. It's exactly what we'd expect. So I was really happy to see that result. And it gives us the inclination that we're on the right track with this sample, and we're actually getting at what we want to see. So to reduce the sample even further down, that previous one was about 250 galaxies, but we want to get like the absolute best sample possible that we can have. So using those Trussler lines, like I said, we also restricted the magnitude, so they're only very bright objects, so less than 25 in the I-band magnitude. And then we also limited the redshift range so that we're targeting the specific emission lines that we want to see. And these are Lyman alpha and C3, and I'll talk a little bit about those later. All you need to know is we should expect to see them in a star-forming sample, so we want to make sure that we're in the range that we will see that. So the total sample is 79 galaxies. You can see them all very tightly around the main sequence there. Again, very happy with that. But we need to analyze all this. And so we have all these spectra, and as you can see, it's very messy. You can't really tell what a result is. There's a lot of like overlapping. Some of the spectra are really like clouding a lot of the data. So we need to process this. So first, as you can see, it goes all the way up to 10,000 angstrom. This is the wavelength that we observed it with. Remember how I said that light gets stretched? We need to stretch it back to the wavelength that it was like when it was emitted, which we do by de-redshifting. So now you can see we go to a cap of about 2,600 angstrom. So this is the range that it was emitted in from these galaxies, so before it was shifted by the space. And you can see that it's a little bit neater. There's some peaks that we might be seeing, but it's also too messy to actually say anything. So we need to go even further. So first we're going to normalize this data. So we take this region from 1460 to 1540 angstrom, which is very commonly observed to be very flat, very featureless. There's no real spikes or dips. So we can take that as like a good average. So we take that, we divide all of the spectra by that, and we get this normalized spectra. Now this is much better than we just had, but it's still not great. You can see that over here we might have like a Lyman alpha result. We might have a couple other spikes, but in order to actually be sure, we need to take the average of this. And so what we're left with is this really clean graph, and you can see very easily spike at Lyman alpha, spikes here, divots here, and specifically a couple of those I want to call your attention to are that Lyman alpha that we mentioned. As I said, it should be here. In high redshift galaxies, it's seen very commonly. It should be in star-forming galaxies, and we see a very great result, which is excellent. We also see some helium-2, which is indicative of type 3 stars, which are very commonly found. They're young stars, so they're seen in star-forming populations. And then C3 and O3 are used to derive metallicity, which is like a physical parameter for star-forming galaxies. And they also are very commonly seen in stellar populations. So in essence, this is a great sample because these are all lines that we see in high redshift galaxies with James Webb and at local analogs like dwarf galaxies. So now we know, as we're looking forward to James Webb, we have these local dwarf galaxies in our own region, and now we have this Vandal sample a little bit farther out, and we can use all three to actually effectively study the physics. So going forward, we have James Webb, like I said. We're going to target that cosmic dawn era, and the Vandals mission is really going to help inform that. And I wrote a piece of code that helps refine the process to propose for James Webb. I'm really excited about all the science coming up with it, and I think that Vandals will be really helpful in informing these future proposals. Any questions? Thank you very much.
Okay, we have some time for one or two questions. Anybody? Oh, there's always one here.
Great talk. You mentioned C3 and O3 lines, and you said you can get some cool physics out. What kind of physics can you get?
Yeah, so you get what's called the metallicity ratio, which is like CO, and that tells you a lot about the actual composition of the stars in those galaxies themselves, as well as the rates that they're producing at. So you can get a lot of interesting criteria out of there of like, when we talk about those stars at the cosmic dawn era, we want to know are they different from the galaxies that we see now, like chemically, physically, the dynamics of them. So getting all these ratios out from just the light is pretty tough. So metallicity, like the CO ratio, is pretty great for that.
And what's next for the Vandal survey? Is there any other really cool observations you can draw from it?
Yeah, so I'm actually really excited because I'm actually taking this project and I will be adapting it for my senior capstone project for my university. So there's a lot more work to go into this. There's already some stuff we want to make sure that we can confirm some of those spikes that you saw. So doing some fitting on those peaks, on those divots, seeing what's an actual result and what's not, cleaning up the data a little bit. But basically, as I said, we can use this as an analog to look forward to future James Webb missions. So if we see lines here, we should expect to see them in James Webb. And my advisor, Dr. Namisha Kumari, is working towards proposing a new mission for James Webb. So I think the Vandals findings will actually tell her what she's supposed to be looking for that future mission.
Thank you.
Awesome. Give it up for Jaden. Thank you. For Sonia, our Physics Today science writing intern.
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Sonia Betcher. This summer, I worked at Physics Today, which is the flagship publication for the American Institute of Physics. If you've ever read Physics Today, you would know that it strives to keep its readers up to date with not only current research and findings from the physics world, but also to keep its readers informed on events and changes in the physics community, the very broad physics community. Often during the summer, I found myself wondering, how far does physics reach? How do the journalists at PT decide what topics to cover out of the dozens of research articles that are published every day? How do they decide what counts as physics? And how are they finding all of these different events and changes that are happening in the organizations, businesses, and communities that fall into physics? So I'm going to be talking a little bit about that today. First of all, I'm going to talk a little bit more about how we choose physics news and my own take on that. And then I'll talk about the 3 pieces that I wrote this summer at PT. And then I'll talk a little bit about the vast skills needed for scientific journalism and the little bit that I picked up on, and also just my other takeaways from this internship. So first, how do we choose physics news? I think a really good first question to ask yourself is, what research counts as physics research? I know a lot of physicists who would argue that physics is the underlying science of all the other sciences. So does that mean that all science, innovation, and technology is physics? In some sense, if you dig down deep enough, it probably is related to physics. And so if you can justify it, and if you can justify that a physics audience would want to read it, I think that it does count as physics research. And especially today with modern research, it's very multidisciplinary. It involves aspects of biology, chemistry, fundamental physics, medicine, computer science, earth science, material science. And so if you can make that argument, then I think it counts. And then my second question, which is numbered 1 for some reason, is what is happening outside of these research findings in the physics communities? There is way more to physics in general than just what research is coming out. There are events and changes happening around the world constantly that impact the research being done and, the people. So this summer I wrote 3 pieces, like I said, and so now I'm going to talk a little bit about each of those. And I feel like they fall in pretty vast categories across the coverage of PT. So the first piece that I wrote was on the physics Olympiads. The International Physics Olympiad is a competition that's been hosted for almost 60 years, and it's hosted in a different country every year, where a bunch of high schoolers, usually about 5 from countries all over the world, come to compete in experimental and theoretical physics with their peers and have fun in the country that they're in. This piece is usually a softball passed to the intern in recent years because it's generally pretty straightforward. You report on the winners and the countries who attended and what the participants did and maybe what the questions were about. And it's pretty standard. This year it was not standard because the international competition was hosted in Iran. And the US, along with a bunch of other countries, decided that they were not going to be going to the international competition. So the competition that normally has over 80 countries had around 40 this year. So a lot of the countries who decided not to attend the international competition instead attended the European Physics Olympiad, which was hosted only a few days before. So now this piece that was supposed to be about one competition and the winners and the countries and what happened at it was supposed to be about 2, and also slightly about the political consequences that were influencing the competitions. This one falls, pretty squarely under international high school physics community, but also has a little bit of that political aspect in it. This is not finished yet. It's on final touches right now. Hopefully it will be done soon. My second piece was a little bit of a blurb that is going to start to become a regular thing in physics today that uses statistics from the AIP statistical research team and their surveys that go out each year. So this piece used data from a survey on the 2021 and 2022 physics bachelor's recipients, where they talked about what influenced them to pursue a physics major. And as it turns out, the biggest influence was informal exposure to science. And while this is like a really cool result in general, and interesting to me personally, it's also has sort of big implications on physics outreach and the importance of having access to physics and exposure to physics outside the classroom as well as inside the classroom. And this came out yesterday in the August edition, so very happy about that. And this sort of covers physics education and just the general state of our physics community. My third piece was on a recent advancement in precision gravity measurements done at UC Berkeley using an optical lattice atomic interferometer. This group published a paper in 2020 that Physics Today covered, where they came up with a new proof of concept basically for a new atomic interferometer that holds atoms in place using lasers rather than dropping them from about 10 meters high to feel gravity. And it was way more efficient, and about 10 times longer of a measurement was able to be made. And in the 4 years since then, they have super updated this atomic interferometer system and tripled the already 10 times measurement time, increased precision and accuracy on the experiment, and they even used these results outside of fundamental physics to decrease the available parameter space for multiple dark energy models, which is pretty cool application. And so this one is pretty straightforward research. I was really impressed this summer with the amount of things that the editors and journalists at Physics Today do. They're not just good at writing. They're also constantly staying up to date with all the research and events that are going on around the world, and also are able to write about really complex scientific topics in a way that a general audience and people who aren't necessarily experts in the field of can understand. Really quickly, my other takeaway from this is during university, I had a tough time with, a lot of classes and jobs and research. Whoop. And I didn't have a lot of time to be curious about physics and even my own field. And this internship really gave me a lot of time to not only get caught up on all of the current physics research happening, but also to start asking myself the questions like, why does this work the way it does? What are we going to use with these results? What can we do with this knowledge? And I think that those are the very important questions that you need to ask as a scientific journalist. So I just graduated with my physics bachelor's, and I'm heading to grad school tomorrow. So that's my takeaway. I hope to take that curiosity with me. Big thank you to Andrew, and also Tony, and also last year's PT intern, Hannah, who is still working there. And they all gave me really great advice and feedback throughout the summer. So yeah, thank you for listening.
So I'll take one question. So we're running late. And then we can have a conversation during lunch. But just in order to respect your time, I'll take one question. Anybody? Yeah.
So a great thing when someone comes to a field with new eyes is they bring new perspectives. So coming to this as you are, what do you think that Physics Today could do to be more relevant to students?
So I got asked that at work as well. And already Physics Today is trying to implement a lot of the things that I would consider important for reaching out to students. Personally, I'm not on a lot of social media, but the social media I am on is not Physics Today related, and so I think they have a pretty good little team of people that's starting to work on increasing the social media influence of Physics Today. And the second thing is publishing and advertising the online articles that are done, making it easier for people to access it outside of the physical copy. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. Please give it up for Sonia. All right, let's give it up for our NIST research intern, Kaden.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming to my presentation on evaluating organic light-emitting diodes for position-sensitive magnetic field sensing. My name's Caden. I was working in the nanoscale device characterization division this summer with Dr. Emily Biddle. So to begin, there's a lot of jargon that I'm going to use throughout this presentation, and I just want you all to bear with me as I give you some definitions. So first of all, I'm going to talk a lot about excitons. These are essentially just an electron and a hole paired together, and then they are actually what cause our organic light-emitting diodes, or organic LEDs, to emit light. Then they're also very sensitive to magnetic fields. Next, I'm going to talk a lot about quantum sensing and magnetic field imaging. This is essentially just using very, very small level interactions to make measurements, and they're very precise in detecting subtle changes in magnetic fields. Then there's magneto-electroluminescence effect. This is essentially just a change in light output for a device whilst under a magnetic field. And then we have paramagnets and diamagnets, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. But it's really just a paramagnet is weakly attracted to magnetic fields while diamagnets are repulsed. So now, my project is actually using these samples that you see here on the right. That actually has 4 organic LEDs on it. You can kind of take note of where they are by the aluminum pattern, and each of those little aluminum rectangles will light up green when they're turned on. So we're using these devices and the exciton reactions within them to see how they'll react under magnetic fields and see if we can layer magnetic films or nanoparticles onto these devices, and then from the other side of the sample, pick out where they're located based off of a change in light output. If we're able to do this, this means that they're position-sensitive capable. So, with that, they can be used in hardware security, robotics, and bioimaging, and many other sectors. So, what is an ideal magnetic field sensor? Ideally, you want to see that can operate at room temperature and is easily scalable. This is often seen by looking at the challenges that sensor technology has to overcome today. They typically require optical excitation and cryogenic temperatures. Because of that, they're very difficult to scale to commercial use. So here's actually just a diagram of a stack of organic LED. You can see here that we're creating a p-n junction. So basically just an area in the device where electrons and holes will meet. You can see that electrons will fall from the cathode down to the emission layer, while holes from the anode will actually reach up to the emission layer. When this happens, they form an exciton, and then a photon will be emitted, or just light. So, excitons and magnetic fields are actually very sensitive, and the way we know this is that we actually see our devices increase in light output as a result of the magnetic field causing more dark states to flip from bright states. So with this, they also operate in room temperature, and because of that, we're hoping that we can use these devices as a potential candidate for an ideal magnetic field sensor. And you can see here a diagram of an exciton once again, and then how they're flipping from the dark to bright state. So they're often characterized by measuring their field sensitivity. As I mentioned earlier, this is done with the magnetoelectroluminescence effect. You can see a plot of what this typically looks like. And to kind of walk you through how we're taking these measurements, you can look here and see that we're placing the sample under a magnetic field and then taking a bunch of measurements of its light output as the field strength is increasing. You can see that we're starting off with negative 0.2 Tesla, working our way to 0.2 Tesla. You see that once it hits 0, there's no change in light output. That's just because there's no magnetic field. But then on the far ends of this, you can see that we're getting a 60% increase in light, which is pretty good. That's a pretty noticeable change. So why does this matter? Well, with magnitudes that high of a light output change, we're hoping to optically detect that with the camera. Additionally, it indicates that you could use it for position-sensitive mapping. This is because with that much of a light output change, if you were to interact with that magnetic field and change its strength, that means that you'll be able to detect those changes in light output. So, with that in mind, we made some alterations to our typical organic LED stack. We're using a camera in place of a photodiode, which is typically used to measure the light output. And then we're also layering paramagnetic films or nanoparticles onto our devices to see if we can look at them from the other side and just pick out where they are by the change in light. And then more recently, we've begun to place diamagnetic materials also onto these devices, and see if we can spot them. So before that, though, we wanted to see if we can actually detect changes in luminescence with our devices. To do this, we took a bunch of data that had basically photodiode output or light output measured at certain currents for the device. Doing this, we compared it to data that we took with a bunch of different images, all at those same currents, and then compared that data. You can see here that we have a very strong linear relationship and correlation between our two measurements. This essentially is just saying, yes, we're able to detect that change in light output, and this could work as a great measurement. So now then we layered our paramagnetic films onto our device to begin taking images. You can see here an example of what that film looks like. We have cobalt iron, only 100 nanometers or so thick, which is incredibly small. And we're layering it onto the device in these small little squares. We're hoping that once we flip the device over, we'll be able to see a change in light output with that. We also did this for nanoparticles, so just a bunch of little specks just flecked across the device. And you can see here, this is how we're actually taking images of a device. We have a camera set up with a microscope, and our samples are being placed just a few millimeters above our magnets. This is giving about a field strength about 7.5 millitesla, so a very small amount. And then with that, we're taking an image with and without that magnet to see how the light output will look differently with those images. However, you can see we've ran into some issues with our nanoparticles. This is not how a device should look. It's very destroyed from the solvent used to layer it on, meaning that it's hard to really detect much of a change in light output when all of this black is just broken device. And then we have our cobalt iron film here. And take note, you're not able to actually see where the magnets are on the other side, which is why we care about this. So we're hoping to see changes in light output where these hollow little boxes are. That's where the films are actually located if you were to look on the other side. So with that and our issues with the mapping, because our films were actually not interacting enough with the magnet, we decided to shift to diamagnets to see if we could see a greater increase in light output. As a result, the field's being concentrated more where the magnets are located. So with that in mind, we layered on really thin gold wire and then also placed silver paint above the device. However, this is all ongoing work, so we're still waiting to see if there's any results depicting a change in light with this. So just to conclude this talk, I wanted to reiterate that organic LEDs are actually sensitive magnetic fields. So with that in mind, we want to pursue the position-sensitive methods to see if we can actually notice those changes in light output from the other side of a device and pick out where they're located to see if they could be applicable to those sectors that I mentioned earlier. For example, in like hardware security, you could actually layer a film of magnets on one side of a microchip, and then you can see if it's been tampered with in the manufacturing process by spotting it from the other side and having a unique identifier for that device. However, that's all I have for you today. Thank you all for listening, and if you have any questions, please feel free to ask.
We have time for one question.
So, I transport us 10 years in the future. Where could this kind of technology be used?
So it could be used in really quite a few sectors. As I just mentioned, it could be used in hardware security to verify if like a microchip has been tampered with through the manufacturing process, because it essentially is giving like a unique identifier, almost like a serial number, you could say, to like the device. Additionally, it's being looked at for being used, say, in like bioimaging. Quantum sensing has a lot of applications, and where there's really small level interactions and sensitivity that you need, it's important to have devices that can detect these changes. So you could use biosensing, you could use it in robotics where you need very precise, tiny movements to actually pick out a spot. So say if you can identify where those magnets are located in a position-sensitive manner, it could actually really have a broad range of applications.
Awesome. Please give it up for Caden.
Hi, everybody. My name is Johnny Meary. Like they mentioned, I'm the FYI Science Policy Intern, and I'm also a student at Harvard studying physics and math. And the title of my presentation is The Science Beat, Reporting and Analysis of Government-Sponsored Discovery. So a little bit of background first about what it is that FYI, so we're a science journalism group, and what exactly are we covering here? So since the beginning of the 20th century, although there's a really rich history behind it, the federal government has emerged as an enormous funder of academic research. Almost all universities have some sort of relation to it, and so this is a kind of a snapshot of some of those organizations. And then here's a quote from one of the architects behind this, Vannevar Bush, who was the one that basically founded the National Science Foundation. It says, "Scientific progress is and must be of vital interest to government." This is a massive machine. Hundreds of billions of dollars have been spent by the government basically supporting physicists to do their research. And so the Department of Energy Office of Science, for instance, runs the national labs, Argonne, Los Alamos, those ones. The National Science Foundation is, of course, very famous. And then there's a large host of military centers for research, including the Office of Naval Research. And then NASA is another one that many of you are famous, NIST, so many more. You could go on and on about this very complex and very wide-ranging system, this machine for science. So with that large machine comes the question of how do you track all that? how do you keep track of a system where so much money is being put into discoveries by physicists? And so this is where FYI comes in. We're one of the only groups that focuses on such a large scope, mainly for the physical sciences. And we do this in a number of ways. One of them is this budget tracker, so I have a little snapshot of that here. And so this summer, I was fortunate enough to work on some of this, and what we do is, when the new appropriations bill comes out, we break it down by group, by the funding lines, and you can kind of get a snapshot for what's happening in science research. So let's say that there's, a couple $1 billion boost in fusion research for a particular department. That's something that's going to show up in our tracker, and that's something that physicists need to be aware of. I mean, it's affecting their discipline very closely. FYI also manages a bill tracker where we take some of the most relevant science-sponsored or science-related bills in Congress. We provide a little summary of them. And then we track agency leadership. And we also, I'd say one of our most important roles is a newsletter that we provide for scientists and policymakers to get a snapshot every week of what's going on in the world of science policy. So, what are some new, quick kind of news going on? So let's say that there's a new law being proposed. Let's say there's a new change in leadership. We'll scour the web for interesting events going on, job opportunities, and events in science policy, and keep everybody informed on it. And so a lot of my work this summer was spent managing some of that, tracking the budget, helping prepare these things, going to hearings to watch the kind of discussions and the debates over how is science going to be funded in the United States today. And then the last, I'd say maybe the biggest one for me was the writing of more long-form articles about science policy. So in addition to our newsletter, we also publish full-length articles that cover particular areas. So I wanted to kind of highlight a couple of the ones that I've written. The first one is AI for Science initiative at DOE gains traction. So the background for this is you're familiar with like ChatGPT, you're familiar with kind of this AI boom for commercial AI, but the Department of Energy is working on basically the idea of a ChatGPT for physics and chemistry is the kind of byline that they're discussing. So this is something called the FAST initiative, and it's trying to create, like I said, like foundational AI models for science. So this was sort of the first article that I wrote, so I got my feet wet in how this works. So we'll attend hearings, we'll watch things, we'll reach out to people for comment, and we'll compile an article that's describing this pretty important change. It's going to impact a lot of people working at a lot of national labs. And so that was my first exposure. The second one, I guess, yeah, so exposure again. The second one is called Radiation Exposure Compensation Act expires amid debate over eligibility expansion. So the background for this one is that in 1990, Congress passed this bill that provides compensation for victims of radiation testing. So if you're familiar with that, you know that atmospheric testing in the United States had some downwind effects. Certain people got sick. There are also uranium miners. So the uranium industry also had people who were adversely affected by government activity. And so this bill was meant to kind of provide some compensation for them, both medically and just because of the adverse effects. And over time, it's been renewed. But lately, this year, there was a big debate in Congress over it because there were sort of two competing bills, or at least two competing schools of thought that proposed different bills. And one was just a simple extension again, just 2 more years, changed the name. And the other one was not just an extension, but an expansion. And so this was saying, like, for instance, certain states are eligible, and so they wanted to expand eligibility to other areas that they said were impacted by this, or even other diseases that they said may have been impacted. And ultimately, because of this debate in Congress, the bill expired and nothing was renewed, even though certain bills were passed, certain bills were moved around. And so as of now, there's no longer a program for it. And this was, I think, a very big project for me. It was very interesting because, I had to reach out to a lot of congressional offices to hear their comments on it, and really get a kind of feel for how, science can be a pretty contentious issue in the government. And then the third article that I wrote about was Ocean Acoustics Seeks Greater Profile. This is basically about a particular discipline, which is ocean acoustics, which had military origins and has outgrown it, basically. And now it's got a lot of commercial applications in marine technology, for instance. And because of that, there's this huge report that they made to try to describe what kind of educational resources are we going to provide to meet this new demand? Because, as I'm sure many of you are, I've never taken a class on ocean acoustics, and I think this was another really great learning opportunity for me, because coming into this, like, I'm familiar, I've heard of AI, I've heard of the nuclear weapons program. I didn't know a lot about ocean acoustics, and I think this really captures one of my big takeaways from the program, which is, getting to see how wide and how expensive this machinery really is, and that everything down to this sort of interesting subfield is fair game. And so, that's kind of a snapshot of my work, and I wanted to kind of end by discussing a little bit about why I think the science policy matters, because this is a physicist group, and I think that we can often have the exposure, which we do when we're younger, of having either physics textbooks or physics research that's presented in a sort of linear way. People make discoveries, and then that's kind of the end of the story. And on a more personal level, I think this will help kind of show why I think it's important, which is that it's an interesting story on why I use this, but the book that I first learned physics from is this book from the 1960s. And when I learned it, it has a chapter on cloud chambers, and it's got a lot of questions about the moon landing. And really, being a physicist back then was entirely different than what it was like today. The textbooks are different, the questions are different, the questions people are asking are different. And all of that, I think, really drives home the idea that to be a physicist is very much influenced by your environment. And the policy questions that were being asked in the government are going to change what it's like to be a physicist. So I think that's a very relevant thing, even for people who are just doing technical things, to be interested in. And so that, I know I'm out of time, but I want to give a quick thank you, especially to my mentors, Mitch and Jacob, just amazing, most generous mentors I could have. And then Kayla Stevens, Michaela Cleaver, the rest of the team, and then all my fellow interns. And yeah, with that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Johnny. We have a question here. Oh, Mitch.
I can't let you escape without asking you a question about Vannevar Bush. So Johnny did mention, but he's done a historical paper. Before he came to the internship, he had done a deep historical paper on this person, Vannevar Bush, who had a deep influence on science policy. And I'm wondering, now that you've had this internship and seen all these present-day debates about science policy, do you see any echoes of history, or are we a completely new environment relative to what the types of things that Vannevar Bush was grappling with back in the day?
Thank you. I did not plant that question. That's a very kind question. I absolutely do. So, for instance, when the NSF was founded in 1950, Bush wrote Science: The Endless Frontier in like 1947. Maybe earlier than that. There's a huge debate in that period about how are we going to fund this huge machine, the National Science Foundation. We proved by example how it works in World War II, but how are we going to do it now? Certain things like, are we going to distribute funding geographically or on the basis of like kind of elite university model? That's something that I think is still playing out today. The debate over which disciplines are relevant. I mean, for Bush, there was a lot of funding being slashed for, say, the social sciences, and that's something that still plays out today. So I definitely think that a lot of the questions that were asked back then are certainly still relevant now. I think there's new ones that are coming up too, and I think there's ones that we've solved as well. So absolutely, and I think we can continually go back, and people do go back and look at that and get inspiration. So yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Please give it up for Johnny. Awesome. Please welcome our AIP Mather Public Policy Intern, Charlotte.
Okay. Hi all, I'm Charlotte Bimson. I'm an entrepreneurial physics student at Case Western, and I'm one of the AIP Mather Public Policy Interns at the Office of Advanced Manufacturing at NIST this year. And today I'm going to be talking to you about how we can use computational modeling and simulation to make a smarter clinical trial process. Specifically, how we can use in silico trials with digital twin technologies to lessen the patient shortage. And I know that's a bunch of technical jargon, but I promise I'll define it. But first, I want to give you some context on why we care about this. So, U.S. biomanufacturing is declining. In a recent study released by the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation, it's comparing the semiconductor manufacturing decline to the biomanufacturing decline, specifically the biomedical industry. If you look at this little graph, it's a screenshot of how our biomedical manufacturing is declining in the U.S. and how we're losing our global leadership positions. And of course, this is a very broad issue, and we can address it, but we should probably break it down a bit before we go straight to the whole how we can fix domestic manufacturing in the US. So we're going to narrow the scope, focusing specifically on the clinical trial process. So a big inefficiency in the biomedical industry is the clinical trial process. It's where most innovations go to fail. The clinical trial process tests both the safety and efficacy of all drugs, biologics, devices in the US before they get into our homes and bodies. And for each of these different categories, the rules of the games are a bit different. But amongst the three, they're all expensive, take a lot of time, and have incredibly high rates of failure. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, it's good they have high rates of failure. We don't want just anything passing through the process. But a lot of this failure isn't attributed to safety and efficacy. Rather, it's attributed to patient population shortages. So 80% of all clinical trials will need extension due to patient enrollment issues. 12% of all clinical trials are self-terminated, and 80% of those self-terminations are due to patient enrollment issues. So this is an incredible waste of time, money, all resources. And industry, academia, the government alike are trying to figure out how do we address this patient population shortage. And we can address it the same way we like addressing all of our modern issues, computers. So a potential solution is preclinical in silico screening using digital twin technologies. And now you get to know what that means. So in silico essentially means in computer. So we're modeling things on computers. Preclinical screening is just a requirement to enter these trials. So we're screening potential products and applicants based on their ability to produce a model. And digital twins, and this is where it gets a little bit more complex, are virtual models that are on the computer that have a physical counterpart. So it's mimicking the structure, the context of its physical counterpart and talking to it simultaneously. So it's updating it based on real-time data from its physical counterpart. And essentially what we're doing is creating models of patients or patient populations on the computer to test medical devices before they go into the trial population. And intuitively, this makes sense, right? Before we put a person in a car, we model the car and test it. Before we send a rocket to space, we model the rocket and test it. And process level, it works too. If we screen the clinical trial process, we're going to have less applicants make it through. If we're able to make virtual patients, we're going to have more patients, right? And of course, like any computational modeling and simulation project, it has its limitations and issues centered around data privacy and data acquisition, as well as error. But because we use computational modeling and simulation all the time, these are pretty standard issues and we know how to address them. We just require a bit of guidance from either the FDA or other lawmaking organizations to better prep us for the future. So to maybe shore up a bit of our digital twin understanding, and also because it's a really cool example and I really like it, I'm going to talk to you about what's pushing forward our current standard of in silico trials, which is Dassault's Living Heart Project. So back in like 2015 or so, Dassault and the FDA collaborated to produce this first digital twin of a whole beating heart. It's got all the chambers, all the valves, works really well. It's completely open source, so if you had your computers, you could pull it up right now and look at it. And not only is it really cool, it also has pushed forward the industry as a whole. So, a few of the limitations, obviously, again, in error and data access. Despite it being open source, we have no open source healthcare data because it's privacy protected information. And as well as there's assumptions in the models because they're based on physical equations, and we can't really model our complete body with physical equations, but they're all can be addressed with modular changes according to Dassault. So this was created back in 2015. 2019, they released it. Works very well, and the FDA decided they're going to double down with Dassault and do another collaboration to really push the needle of regulatory science this time. And that has led to the creation of the Enrichment Project. So they've basically done an extended report on the technical and policy feasibilities of creating in silico trials, which if you've been paying attention to my presentation, that's exactly what I'm talking about right now. And it's a 5-year project, and again, started in 2019, 5 years later, puts us at 2024. So Dassault has released a report saying that the project went very well, and they have promising results that are going to be released in a playbook. The FDA has said nothing, and we're waiting for them to release the playbook. But we'll see when that comes out. So not only, well, when this playbook is released, not only is it pretty cool, but it also has substantial impact on the feasibility of the in silico clinical trials. So it's going to give us FDA leadership and standardization in the process itself, which will help shore up some of those computational modeling and computational modeling and simulation limitations. It also shows us that this is a good solution, right? It gives us feasibility that it's going to be technically efficient. It'll increase patient populations, not only by decreasing the amount of trials we have, but creating those virtual patients. Also, if we are successful in medical devices, say using the digital heart, there's potential we could be successful in pharmaceuticals as well, which would be great for the industry as a whole. So the Richmond project really pushed forward our regulatory science in the US, which in turn will help our biomanufacturing in the US. And I know this is a pretty brief outline of a very complex issue, process, and the technology that bridges the both. But my work this summer has been accumulated into a report talking about the shortcomings of the clinical trial process as a whole, as well as how different solutions and different technologies we can use to potentially solve it. I'd like to thank Mahesh and Brad especially for being my mentors this summer, as well as all of the Office of Advanced Manufacturing and the SPS intern cohorts. Thank you.
Yes.
Could you go back to slide 5?
Oh God.
I have a question, and
That one?
Yeah, this is perfect. So the modular changes, could you go into more detail on that and how you maybe make adjustments on your models to make them more efficient and accurate to reality?
Oh, little did you know I exactly prepared for this question. So, it's going to get a little bit physicsy, but the way that they model the flow of fluid in the heart is using an equation that's based on essentially a circuit, right? If we know electrical engineering, it's basically a complex Wheatstone bridge, right? And this isn't the most efficient way to model fluid flow in the heart. They want to use, because Dassault is like a very large corporation that has lots of money to throw at things, they want to create their own fluid modeling software to represent fluid flow in the heart rather than modeling it with like a circuit, essentially. So that's one way, but they're working on improving their model. And because it's all open source, you have a bunch of different organizations, government, industry, academia alike, all kind of pushing towards the modernization of this, not only this model, but other similar models. They have a living brain model. It's not as good as a living heart, but they're getting there.
Awesome. Please give it up for Charlotte. All right, excuse me. Let's give it up for our SPS program engagement intern, Collins.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, my name is Collins, and I'll be presenting on my project, Streamlining SPS Chapter Support Through Data Management and Automation Exploration. It's such a long title. And I was supervised by Rihanna and Ehrenreich with help from Alejandro de la Puente, PhD. All right, so a key question we should ask ourselves is, how does SPS understand its impact on its members? And TLDR, chapter reports. It's all about chapter reports. And basically, chapter reports are documents submitted by local SPS chapters that provide detailed accounts for like activities, achievements, and this is over a specified period of time, like typically annually. And these chapter reports serve multiple purposes, and some of which include contact information, so they gather like up-to-date contact information for like incoming student elects for the SPS local chapters, as well as questions like how best SPS National can support them. And by this, SPS National gathers important data on how to best allocate resources to effectively provide and show up like inactive or dormant chapters, or better support like the very active chapters. And this also serves as a purpose for awarding like the best SPS chapters. So what I want you to get from this is that chapter reports are very, very crucial for SPS National. Next slide. All right, so what's the current state of affairs? Here you have the zone by zone, like chapter report submissions. Thank you, Rihanna. And on this side, the color-coded one is the activity report. So this is the most recent data, and this is the year by year data that need mega file that needs to be updated with the recent data. And so basically, the current state of affairs is very manual in nature. You go to the recent chapter reports, like the source file. You find the typical school along with the column name, like chapter advisor. So for example, you go to University of Maine, you see the chapter advisors Frank Dudish, and you go there and see whether it's updated or not, and you update it. And this is just a snapshot of like the activity report update process. And one thing to mention is that the source file for different like fields or columns in the activity report vary. For example, if you want to obtain like a particular chapter's like last sigma pi sigma induction date, you have to generate a file from like a portal called My Honor Society. So it's a very extensive process and easy, but it's very manual. And as I can imagine, I took it upon myself to do it manually for Zone 1. How many zones are there in the SPS National? 18. There were 16 schools in Zone 1, and 16 times 18, who knows that? Anyway, what this is all to say, although it's a very easy process as I detailed, it's very manual and very slow. And there's a need to automate. So what was I tasked with? One thing, so the foundational stuff was to, as always, review and process over 200 chapter reports, which was for 2024, from different SPS chapters and ensure accurate and up-to-date records in the zone-specific databases. But the niche, or like the most important thing, was to automate the process. As I detailed, like it's very manual and there's a need to automate this, and it's, to my understanding, has never been explored, the automation. The automation has never been explored, that is. And so one key task was to develop an automated system for updating activity reports using a technique of my choice, significantly streamlining the process for chapter activity reports. And I want to tell you a keyword, technique of my choice. So my mind went to, okay, I could become, I came on July 9th, and today is August 2nd? Yes. I could go to LinkedIn Learning and become an Excel whiz, but I didn't want to do that. So I called upon my skills as a developer. And I implemented code to do this for me. So a little bit of jargon, if it can be called jargon, is this is Python, and I used a library in Python called Pandas, which is used for data analysis and data visualization. And luckily, Pandas can allow you to read and write into different Excel files or even CSV files. So the key thing is to identify the school name in the different files. So for example, the source file and then the destination file, the chapter reports and the activity reports. And then it's basically reads and writes. But in the real world where we exist, no data is clean. So even though I took steps to strip the strings, the like leading white spaces and the trailing white spaces and all that stuff, even though I took great care to clean the data, I implemented something else called fuzzy matching. So fuzzy matching is a technique that's used to identify strings that are similar but not quite the same. So for example, if in the activity report you have Harvard University, but in the chapter report someone wrote Harvard College, I mean, to the naked eye, like in the manual nature, they're both the same, but if it's just normal for the pandas, it's not going to recognize it as the same. So fuzzy matching assigns like a similarity score between the two strings. So and the scores typically range from 0, which is completely different, to 100, which is identical. And the highest score indicates a very close match. And this, when I say algorithm, is used a lot in data cleaning and spell checking. And so armed with pandas, Python, fuzzy matching, I went to work on this, and I really love coding. So this was so fun. All right. I want to say that I mentioned that different data can be found from different sources. I worked on the data that can actually be found in the chapter activity report. So one thing or one way, or the next step we can improve, we can do is to improve the data collection so that all the data I need to update from the activity report comes from the chapter report. So for example, in order to update the department chair head, I had to go and scrape the data for like different websites, which is a long task like to do, like it's very difficult. But so improve data collection to collect all data in one location. And finally is to document the process so far and to add to the standard operating procedure so that the SPS Council can inform what the new data collection can look like. Yeah, so I'm gonna end it there, and I'm gonna thank Dr. Alejandro De La Puente, PhD. Sorry, I called you doctor. Rihanna, Earl, and my fellow interns. Thank you.
Anybody in the audience would like to ask one question? Yeah. No. Yeah, I get to talk to him.
So, what was the highlight of your summer so far? The one thing that you're happiest about?
I like at work, right? Anything. Okay. So it was playing spike ball with the rest of the interns. And yeah, Raiden and we won the intern Olympics for spike ball. So that was nice. And also the coding was amazing. I like coding. Yeah.
Thanks, Collins. You helped me, so I'm very selfish here. Thank you so much.
All right, let's welcome our NIST research intern, Evan.
Hello. Right. So yeah, my name is Evan Erickson. I am a rising junior at MIT, and I'm a NIST intern. And this summer, I worked on testing membranes for radiation pressure optomechanics. So I worked at the NIST optomechanics lab this semester, and this lab focuses on optomechanics, which is coupling light with mechanical motions. So specifically, we use light's momentum to influence optical setups to get feedback and stuff. Now, this has a lot of applications from high sensitivity instruments to emerging quantum technologies, specifically at room temperature. And one of the difficulties that we face is that there's these tight constrictions on the frequency and quality of these vibrations in order to do this quantum technology at room temperature. We'll get back to that later. But what I worked on was focusing on a membrane designed for this coupling of light and mechanical vibration. So it's a 3.5 millimeter wide chip and with a periodic array of holes etched into it. And these holes are designed to control its optical and mechanical properties. And there's two scales of them. First, there's this larger array of holes that you can see, and this controls the mechanical properties, what frequencies that this membrane can vibrate at. But in the center, there is a much smaller array of holes. And these control the optical properties, specifically increasing the reflectivity of this sample. So the material normally in this membrane only gets a reflectivity of about 20%. But as we'll see, because of this array of holes here, we're able to get much higher, which is very useful for actually getting the most out of light that we're shining onto this membrane. Now, ahead of time, we had mocked this up in a simulation, so we did have an idea of what the set of frequencies this should vibrate at. So another part of my job would be to verify that our simulations are good, the design is right, it gets the properties that we want. So in terms of actually working with the membrane, we needed to probe its optical and mechanical properties, and we'd often do this with a laser. And we get the best results when we shine it on the central pad because it's the most reflective. However, that pad is very small. This is 3.5 millimeters wide, and it's about 1% of the entire area. So it's very hard to find. So what we did to locate it is we mounted it on a 3D positioner that allowed us to move it very small amounts, and then we focused a laser at it. And depending on how much laser light actually got transmitted through, that made it through, we were able to, I wrote up interface to basically reconstruct an image of it. So by doing this scan, we can pretty quickly locate this central pad, which allows us to do a lot more interesting things. So one of the first things that we did was figure out the reflectivity of the central pad. And to do this, we set up something called a Fabry Pro interferometer. Now this is just two mirrors with light bouncing between them. And the idea of this interferometer is that a little bit of light gets through each mirrors with each reflection. No mirror is perfect, some of it gets through. But this output light is only significant if these reflections interfere constructively, if they're all in phase. And this only happens if the wavelength of light is just right based on like the size of this cavity. So we get, if we scan a laser across a variety of wavelengths, we get a bunch of resonance peaks where this output is very strong, where we get this constructive signal. Now the reason why this is useful is because the shape of these peaks, namely their width, depends on these reflectivities of these two mirrors. So by using our sample and a concave mirror that we know a lot about, by analyzing the shape of these peaks, we can reconstruct the reflectivity of the central pad across a wide, or across a spectrum of wavelengths. And for this sample, we were able to get a maximum reflectivity of about 99.7% at the peak wavelength. So just because of that kind of crystal structure of holes, we were able to get a much higher reflectivity than we would with just the membrane alone. Now that's just the optical properties. Now we also care about the mechanical properties. And this is a little bit more difficult because normally this membrane vibrates on the order of picometers. And an atom, a hydrogen atom is 50 picometers. So we have to measure things on the order of atoms. So what we do is we set up a different type of interferometer, a Michelson interferometer. So this one works by splitting a laser beam in two, sending along two different paths, bouncing them off of mirrors, recombining them, and looking at that output. And we'll either get a very strong signal if these two waves are in phase, if that path length difference allows them to be in phase, or a very short one if the path length difference causes them to be out of phase. So what this allows us to do is by placing our membrane as one of these mirrors, its vibrations that it just inherently does will correspond to a change in the output signal. So we get this very noisy looking data. However, the noise from this data comes from the vibrations in the membrane. So this is all based on the different frequencies that the membrane can vibrate at. So if we break down what frequencies we can see in this noisy data, we get a bunch of these peaks, which correspond to the spectrum, the set of frequencies that this membrane can vibrate at. So we can compare this experimental spectrum to our simulated spectrum, and we get a very close correspondence. This is actually very good, especially in some very key properties. You may notice there's kind of a gap where there's not a lot of allowed frequencies, and this is creatively called a band gap. And the reason for this was that array of holes, that large array of holes. It sort of acts as a mirror. It prevents certain frequencies of this mechanical wave from propagating through. Now you'll note there's actually some frequencies that it can vibrate at in this band gap. And that's due to that central pad. And the central pad, since it breaks the symmetry of the array of holes, it allows some vibrations to oscillate within this band gap. And this allows us to get defect modes. And because they're vibrating in this band gap, these vibrations can't extend out through the larger crystal. So they're contained near this defect. And so this keeps the energy near the defect. So these hold on to energy very well, which we want in order to do these applications where we have to hold them in these states for very long periods of time. So, and yeah, the experimental results aligned very well with our simulation data. We were able to get within a few % of the expected the simulation, which was really good. But this is only one of the mechanical properties that we care about. The other one is how good these vibrations are. What's their quality factor? And the quality factor is a measure of how many vibrations these frequencies can go through before their energy decreases by a factor of V. Basically, the higher the quality factor, the longer they can vibrate out. So what we do is we initiate something called ring down. We excite one of these modes with a driving laser, getting it to a very large amplitude, and then we remove the driving laser. And this causes the amplitude to decay as the energy dissipates out. And the rate of this exponential decay tells us the quality factor, how good it is at holding on to this energy. So for the one defect mode, the one that was very close to the center, we were able to get a quality factor of 10 million, which is a lot. This thing is vibrating thousands of times per second, hundreds of thousands of times per second, and we had to observe it for several seconds to get a noticeable decay. And notably, this is about 10 times better than previous NIST designs, so this current design was a big step of improvement. So yeah, in conclusion, my work this summer focused on this membrane and creating the interfaces to scan the sample, probing it with lasers, and the design of this allowed us to get very good reflections and oscillations. And notably, referencing back to what I started at, if we look at this product of its quality factor and frequency, it is about that a threshold that we need, one of the necessary conditions to get these kind of quantum room temperature technology stuff. So this is a very good initial step to like progressing to those technologies. So yeah, I want to thank you all very much for listening, and I am open to any questions.
Super cool work. So if you wanted to increase your precision for your simulation for the frequency response of the membrane from 5% to something better, what's the 1 or 2 steps that you would do?
Yeah, so I think the primary issues would be partially with the experiment itself and also the design of them. So notably, this is one I'm most familiar with. The central pad that we're getting the crystal on, during the etching process, it didn't pan out quite as well. So like, I don't think we didn't get as high reflectivity as we wanted. So that's like one of the issues with like the experiment simulation. The actual membrane may not be exactly what we simulate. So that's one of the major issues.
I just was wondering if you could talk more about how maybe lattice shape might be, or what lattice type might be affecting like the behavior, maybe even like the band gap, for instance.
Yeah, so so the band gap comes from, it has to come from this periodic array, and basically what happens is because of all the reflections at these different interfaces, you'll get very strong deconstructive interference at certain frequencies. Yeah, it depends a lot on trial and error of these shapes. It kind of, just what frequencies, like different wavelengths have developed band gaps. There's a lot of like fine tuning that has to be done here. So it's a bit of an explorative process to discover like what structures give like the best band gaps for our purposes. All right, thank you.
All right, let's give it up for our NIST research intern, Bryn.
Thank you. Like she just said, my name is Bryn Schierenbeck, and this year I was a research intern at the National Institute of Standards and Technology. I was in the physical measurement laboratory with Josh Pomeroy, and as you can see, my talk is entitled Enhancing Cryogenic Soldering Methods for Quantum Chip Integration, and I'm very excited to tell you all what that means. So, first let's establish what are cryoelectronics. These are basically a branch of electronics that are designed to operate in cryogenic temperatures, which is about sub 4 Kelvin. These are not naturally occurring temperatures on Earth, or not commonly. A good example of an application of this would be any electronics sent into space. One big issue, however, that they're experiencing is attaching their media to the circuit boards. And media can mean anything from chips to capacitors, transistors, what have you. So that's their main issue right now. What our team has been doing is wire bonding. So this involves thin aluminum wires connecting the bonding plates on the chip to the bonding plates on the circuit board, which I'm going to refer to now as PCB. Unfortunately, this is a very fragile and tedious process and just a very frustrating thing overall. What has been happening is when the chips are brought down to cryogenic temperatures, these bonds fracture or detach mechanically in some sort of way. So my responsibility this summer was to explore more direct bonding methods, because another reason that this is not working is the indirect bonding methods result in an inefficient microwave frequency transmission, which is needed for the specific device that this team is working on, control. So I'm looking more into direct bonding. What I needed to do was assemble samples using the silicon-based chips provided and their corresponding PCBs, and assess their mechanical and electrical connection of each assembly. How I was to do this was to, if the chip stayed attached to the PCB, that was a mechanical success. Ideally, this would stay attached indefinitely. And electrical success, as you can see on these chips, all of these bonding pads have a different chip or a different bonding pad on the PCB or on the chip that they still correspond to. So these should be electrically connected. What you can do is take your average multimeter, connect it to the pins on the PCB that the bonding pads correspond to, measure the resistance, and ideally, if something is connected, you have a very low resistance. So we're trying to maintain less than 1 ohm between these pins throughout the entire cooling process and past cycling. So I needed to collect experimental data on how these happened, or how these behaved. So I went through a few direct bonding methods. Most of you might be familiar with the term solder. Some of you might not be familiar with the fact that there are many different types of soldering. So you probably have most commonly heard of hand or manual soldering, which involves taking a heated tool, your solder wire, and manually attaching your media to the PCB. It's very reliable, very good, easy process, easily accessible. However, it is not the level of precision that we're looking for with these chips. Another type of soldering is wave soldering. So this has great precision and accuracy. However, this is mainly designed for industry and bulk production because, as you can see on this, basically this right here and this right here are your PCBs with all of the media attached. They go through a machine where liquid solder comes up and touches the bottom of your PCB, which is why this is ideal for through-hole specifically. They touch the bottom and secure your media to the PCB. I do not have access to a molt of liquid solder, so that was not going to be a good process for us to go with. The last method is reflow soldering. This is a very straightforward process. So basically the solder comes in paste form in this process, and you apply it to your PCB, put your media on top, and then you put it into the oven for a specific temperature profile designed for the material. The only con is that the temperature of the melting point of your solder could be higher than the melting point of your PCB, which could cause warping, but it's usually a very safe process. So we focused on this. I eventually came up with a process designed for our equipment. So you would apply the solder paste to the bonding pads using a stencil. As you can see on this one, our bonding pads are gold, so that's why there's a nice yellow outline right here. You basically put your solder paste on your squeegee or directly on your stencil, take a swipe, and this is what it should look like. Obviously, these bonding pads are not covered, so this was not exactly the most successful trial, but Then you carefully place your chip face down onto the PCB. With typical industry practice of reflow soldering, this is done by a machine. However, because of the scale of our chips, you're able to do it with pretty high accuracy, just hand placing it, as long as you don't have the coffee jitters, found out. Then you put the entire assembly into the oven and you heat according to the paste profile, which for us looked about 175 degrees Celsius for about 4 minutes. And then you put it in front of a fan and you're set. So these are what the assemblies looked like. You have your pins that eventually go through here, attached to our jig, which attaches into the LCP, which is a large plate cooling system. And they get cooled down to about 4 Kelvin, and then you would measure your electrical connection and your mechanical connection. So I assembled quite a variety of these. Out of 18 samples, 5 made it to the cooling process, which is a little unfortunate. Basically, what I mean by made it to the cooling process is that they had a resistance low enough that I feel like they were a viable sample. Unfortunately, you know how I said we wanted less than 1 ohm resistance? I was only able to get into about 1 kilo ohm of resistance. So not ideal, but it happens. Out of these 5 samples that made it to the cooling process, 2 maintained a mechanical connection throughout the cooling process, meaning that the chip did not fall off the board. Out of that, none maintained an electrical connection. So unfortunate, but that's science. Common failures, incorrect refill profile. As you can see in this one, I burned it pretty bad. Unfortunate. Or I accidentally would fry the connection when we would hand solder the pins that you saw previously into place. That would sometimes mess with the resistance there. We also had a lot of excess solder paste, so on this, I wish I had a better comparison, but you can see that there's a lot of just junk in these connections, and that's not ideal. And the mechanical failure when the chip falls off, and that's unfortunate. But what did we learn? We learned that it can be very difficult without an actual reflow oven. So there are ovens designed for this process specifically. We did not have one. I had a laboratory oven, which was controlled by a transformer since the dial on it did not work. So that was a lot of jimmy rigging going on. Boards should be redesigned with smaller bonding pads. The excess solder was a huge problem, and if we had smaller bonding pads and maybe a thinner stencil, this could be easily resolved. And finally, further testing with a greater variety of materials would be more than ideal. Specifically indium. Indium actually has results of operating at cryogenic temperatures in a way that we want. So unfortunately, it was delivered yesterday, so I never got a chance to work with it, but hopefully the team will be able to explore that eventually. That's all I have, but I really wanted to take a second to thank everyone that was involved with me getting here. Josh Pomeroy, he wasn't able to be here today, but he was my mentor, and I had a great summer working with him. Nikki, Ava, Christian, Adrian, Pooja, and Benjamin, thank you guys so much. Thank you, you're awesome. And SPS for allowing me to participate in this program yet again, because this year was even better than last year. How is that possible? I don't know, but thank you guys so much for giving me the opportunity.
We have time for a few questions. You have a question? Thank you.
So you mentioned that the applications for this are particularly accessible for like space technologies because they operate at that cold temperature. How do they currently maintain operational efficiency without having already have that capability?
That's a good question. So I actually recently learned this. Because they don't have a good solution for this issue yet, they actually keep all of their electronic components, or at least from what I know, most of their electronic components are kept in temperature-controlled spaces, so they are expending a lot of time, energy, and resources just keeping all of these components at room temperature or at an operational temperature, and that is a huge issue that they are trying to modify with experimental data like this.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bryn. Awesome. All right, let's bring it back. All right, let's give it up for our Niels Bohr Library and Archives intern, Piper.
Hello, everybody. My name is Piper. I've been working this summer at the Niels Bohr Library and Archives on the general topic of climate resilience in low to middle income regions and intersections with science and policy. And this is going to be a very, very brief discussion on some of the intersections that I found in government and scientist archives and documents. So first of all, what is climate resilience? I'm going to define climate resilience to be the ability for a community to recover from climate threats, where climate threats are not restricted to the effects of climate change, and recovery is holistic in infrastructure, economically, and culturally. I found the term climate resilience to originate in around the time of 2010 in scientific publications and books, and I think that it probably was derived naturally from an interest in vulnerability assessments in ecology and resources. So around the time of the mid-1900s to the early 2000s, scientists and policymakers were really interested in the ability of the environment and of ecological systems to recover from some type of damage. And in 1973, I came across C.S. Holling, who was an ecologist, and I think that he possibly was one of the first to pioneer the relationship of society with ecological resilience. And so from the interest in socioeconomic vulnerability comes an interest in socioeconomic resilience. We also have this interest of how to strengthen the climate resilience in vulnerable regions, and today it's widely accepted that vulnerable regions to climate change are often low to middle income, and so examining the climate resilience of these regions is important to minimize the critical impacts of climate threats. So an example of climate resilience in action could be to design wetlands which will filter and absorb contaminants, and this would decrease the critical impact felt in a vulnerable community of a mass drinking water contamination event due to flooding. A project like this can include several different scientific disciplines. It could include chemists, physicists, climate scientists, engineers, and so on. So I was interested in how the intersections of science and policy with the concept of climate resilience in low to middle income regions have been discussed and documented in modern history. I identified some possible scopes to narrow my research. I identified ethics and equity, scientific diplomacy, community adaptation, and technology innovation and infrastructure exchange, as well as knowledge. Then I looked for these scopes in archival and reported documents, hoping that it might give us a better idea for how effective the science and policy has been, how we've talked about it in the past, and maybe how to start moving forward. So this slide is focused on demonstrating some of the scopes that I found in my project this summer, and I'm going to bring attention to a few in specific. So in 1972, we had the Stockholm Conference, and I found ethics and equity in the Stockholm Conference. Its declaration mentions developing nations 128 times in the 77-page report, and this shows that scientists and policymakers at the time were already concerned with the effects of climate threats that they would have on low to middle income regions. In 1992, we had the Rio Conference, which resulted in Agenda 21. And in the archival report from Agenda 21, they suggest a code of practice showing concern for ethics. And they also encourage scientists to participate across borders so that all nations have a chance to strengthen their climate resilience. And then in 2016, we have the Paris Climate Agreement. And the Paris Climate Agreement talks about a lot of the same principles that other documents have talked about before it. But we're also exposed to more evidence of community adaptation by financial means and through economic diversification. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the scopes that I came across in scientific archives. And I think I found a good example of scientific diplomacy with William P. Elliott. He was an atmospheric scientist who had decades of work and correspondence with government organizations regarding climate change. And the Niels Bohr Library and Archives just so happens to have 2 full bins of these correspondences and papers with governments. One day I got really lucky. I was flipping through one of his several personal notebooks. I mean, like, there's probably like 12 different notebooks here, and I just so happened to come across, in capital letters, their LDC, or least developed countries. So here in this image right here, he's jotting down some quick notes about how climate change will impact society. And this was really, really fortunate to me because I found evidence then of this scientist who was involved in the science and government policy of climate change, and he is now seems to be interested in the effects on society. And in the top left on that image, you can also see, maybe make out a name, Ravel. And it's clear that William P. Elliott was inspired by Roger Ravel by mentioning his name at the top here. Ravel was another scientist who was deeply involved in climate change at this time, but who was also highly interested in its effect on society. And thanks to this archive, I started to look at Roger Ravel. So Roger Ravel was a scientist focused on oceanography, but he quickly began to do work on climate change, and he started taking his work to the public platform pretty quickly. His concern for technology and science exchange and ethics and equality are shown in the way that he participated in committees such as the Board on Science and Technology for International Development. But he was especially passionate about making science and technology accessible to what they would refer to at that time as underdeveloped nations. And he was especially involved in different environmental issues such as overpopulation, pollution, food access, and of course climate change.
So I was pleasantly surprised to see that scientists and policymakers for several decades have been so aware of the disproportionate effects of climate threats on low to middle income regions of the world. But then I wondered, why are we still struggling to strengthen the climate resilience of vulnerable regions? And after reading through the key barriers to climate resilience, shared by the most recent report by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, I settled on 2 large areas of improvement. This is scientist initiatives and an unstable political landscape. So within scientist initiatives, we have the potential for scientists to conduct research and produce technology with an emphasis on cultural considerations. This would increase the general public awareness, engagement, urgency, and willingness to adopt climate adaptations within that community. I also think that when working on technologies for another region, it's really, really important to have the local community actually at that table and involved in the problem-solving conversations. By doing this, we can gauge the practicality, we can gauge impact, including a possible damage assessment that was maybe unintentional, and this way we can also maintain cultural awareness. I also think that there is room for scientists to place emphasis on materials research, which has a focus on locally abundant and accessible materials to the region. This second part is a little sticky, and I'm still thinking about this part. I guess that would be an area of future research for anybody who's interested in this topic. So this summer, I developed a series of blog posts for the NBLA website. In these blog posts, I talk a little bit more about the history of climate resilience. I developed an interactive timeline to show some involvement from scientists as social stewards in the development of climate change policy. And I go a little bit more in depth on some of the archives that I looked at in this presentation. So these blogs should be live on the NBLA website hopefully next week. Thank you all very much for listening.
Yep.
Thank you. Thanks for your presentation. Really enjoyed that. From all the things that you've been reading and researching, do you have an opinion on how at least the U.S. should balance regulation versus I don't know, technology advancement? So as an aside, a book you might love reading is called The Wizard and the Prophet. It's kind of maybe you've heard of it?
I haven't, no, but remind me at the end and I will look at it, yeah.
It's kind of related to the question. So there's sometimes 2 trains of thoughts of how to approach some of these problems. One is a little bit more regulatory. How do you restrain societies or encourage, culture change, conservation movements? That's the prophet. And then the wizard side is, can we technology our way out of a problem? So just wanted to see if you had an opinion.
Yeah, I think that is definitely a tricky part. So that was sort of a part that I breezed over. I was hoping somebody would kind of ask about it, actually. So there is an unstable political landscape in the U.S., and I mean, I don't think that's a huge secret. And this does have effects when we're talking about the climate resilience of vulnerable regions. For example, we have the U.S. resistance to Paris Climate Agreement. We've been in and out of that. The Kyoto Protocol we pulled out of in 2012. And we, to this day, even though we have an administration that is so passionate about the environment and doing a lot of work and funding that, we have a lot of resistance in our administration still to the loss and damage compensation that's within the Paris Climate Agreement. So I think that it's a really, really tricky subject. I think that, for me, something that might help is really falling back on this scientist initiative, having scientists that are really, really passionate about it. And I think that's part of what I thought was so cool about this project that I did, was that, I guess, in my experience with academia and physics, I thought that physicists were just kind of focused on the science. And lo and behold, we have a lot of involvement with scientists and policy, and they're passionate about low to middle income regions of the world and making that science and technology available. So I think maybe there's room for more of that. And I don't think that scientist initiative is restricted to maybe quote wealthier countries or wealthier regions of the world. I think that Scientist Initiative is also highly applicable within maybe low to middle income regions as well. We can definitely talk more though. Thank you.
Awesome. Please give it up for Piper. All right, let's give it up for our APS Step Up intern, Amanda.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Amanda McLean, and I'm a rising senior at Vanderbilt University, where I'm majoring in physics, creative writing, and the communication of science and technology. I was the APS Public Engagement Step Up intern this summer, working primarily with Nicole Schrody and the whole public engagement team. So just a brief outline before we get started. I want to first give you some background on the Step Up program, and then we're going to talk about 3 of the major projects I worked on for the program: a social network analysis, work on the careers in physics lesson, and work on the women in physics lesson. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some of the miscellaneous work I did for public engagement, and then we'll go into some questions. So what actually is the Step Up program? Step Up is a pretty long acronym. It stands for Supporting Teachers to Encourage the Pursuit of Undergraduate Physics. Basically what that means is it's a whole network of high school teachers, college professors, scientists, educational professionals, administrators, who are all working towards the common goal of inspiring young women to pursue physics in college. So the Step Up program is kind of a threefold program. There are 2 lessons that are taught in the classrooms, one on careers in physics and one on women in physics. And there's also an everyday action guide that helps teachers make their classrooms more accessible and inclusive. So the first real project I did for Step Up this summer was work on social network analysis. Social network analysis is literally exactly what it sounds like. You're looking at social networks and you're analyzing them to learn more about them. So a previous intern, Saksham, did some social network analysis for Step Up of the first teacher cohort. And so I was tasked with doing a literature review of the use of social network analysis in physics education research in general to kind of understand the landscape that Saksham's project was working in. So I did a ton of reading on the use of social network analysis in physics education research, along with Meg Healy, who also works in the public engagement team. And one of the things we found is that most social network analysis that's done in physics education research is actually looking at student dynamics. So there's a lot of analysis of student networks and student interactions in classrooms, but where we see a gap is that there's not a lot of study of actual physics teachers. So once we identified this gap and we looked at the landscape that this research exists in, we then used it to compile background for Saksham's social network analysis of Step Up's first teacher cohort. And we put this together to create a poster for the 2024 AAPT conference, which is what we see here. I've outlined in red the parts that I had the most contribution to. So we kind of laid out the landscape of the project, a brief introduction, the hypothesis, and the theoretical framework that we were working in. And then we also said, okay, well, we've identified this gap. There's not a lot of study of physics teacher networks. And we have this social network analysis that was done to look at this specific teacher network. What can we do going forward to continue to understand physics teacher interactions and see how we can use these interactions to support undergraduate pursuit of physics, particularly in underrepresented populations? The next project I worked on for the Step Up program was expanding the careers in physics lesson. The careers in physics lesson is designed to help students understand the breadth of careers they can pursue with a physics degree, right? To show them you don't just have to go and get your PhD and stay in research if that's not what you want to do. So one of the things on the careers in physics lesson is this career matching tool, where a student can go say, I'm really interested in having time for my family. I really want to work to help the environment. I want to work with people. I want to have an exciting job. So they go in and they put their values, they put their interests, and they get matched with profiles of actual physicists who have gotten undergraduate degrees in physics, and they get to learn more about the careers that they're in today. So one of the things that I was doing was expanding the profiles to have even more representation. So I went through a ton of different people who were nominated by themselves, by their friends, by their colleagues, and I looked for people specifically who had stories that were counter-narratives. Counter-narratives is not just, I was always good at math, and then I found physics, and I was really good at physics, and then I got my degree in physics, and I was like, let me do my PhD, and I excelled, and then I got an immediate postdoc, and now I'm a professor. We want people who have a little bit of a different journey so that students can know that's not the only path they can take. So I found, I think, like 8 or 10 people who I thought really fit the bill. And I ended up interviewing 2 of them. We had Heather, who's a program manager at a sustainable energy company, and Nikita, who's a food scientist working to develop plant-based proteins. One of the things that I thought was really interesting about Nikita's story is she had a whole other career in medical device design before she ended up pivoting to food science because she was really not having a lot of career satisfaction. So these two profiles are going to be included in the next iteration of the step-up materials for the next cohort. Lastly, I also helped to update the Women in Physics lesson. So the Women in Physics lesson is supposed to give a broad representation of female participation in physics across the globe. And all of the statistics in this lesson were from the 5th International Conference on Women in Physics, which is since outdated. So I ended up going through pretty much all of the documents from the 8th International Conference on Women in Physics, which is like 40 countries were represented, so a lot of papers. And I pulled pretty much every single number I could find that documented the participation of women in physics. So undergraduate students, grad students, PhDs, faculty, what have you. I put them all on a spreadsheet, and then I went through and I found good representations of different scopes of undergraduate participation in physics, specifically female participation. And I put these all together into a graph to try to give students an understanding of what it looks like across the globe for female participation in physics. And then I also updated the corresponding international fact sheet, which gives a little bit more background on the scope of female participation in physics for each country represented in the graph. So this is the graph. It's going to get beautified by like the Step Up graphics team. But essentially what you can see here is we have the countries on the horizontal axis, and then the vertical axis is percentage of undergraduate physics students that identify as female. Something that I think is really interesting about this graph, and which I think is very important about the international fact sheet, is that these numbers tell one story, right? We can see there's low percentages in Taiwan, US, the United Kingdom, and higher percentages in Canada and Iran. But what you can't see from this graph is that although Iran has the highest percentage of undergraduate participation from women, it's actually been steadily decreasing for 15 years. And Taiwan, while it has the lowest, has seen a 10-point increase in the past 7 years. So there's really a lot of mobility in these numbers, and I think it's important that we also look at that side. Finally, I did a lot of just like miscellaneous projects for public engagement. I was really kind of bouncing around between different things. One of the biggest things that I worked on was developing lesson extensions for Physics Quest 2024. Physics Quest is like a series of lessons aimed at a middle school audience, allowing younger students to engage with more exciting and interesting and high-level physics topics. These ones are focused on plasma, and the lesson extensions are optional activities that teachers can choose to include in the lessons after they do the main body of the lesson. And they're a lot more expansive, so you can incorporate art and creativity, real-world applications, and engineering components. I also participated in the APS Wiki Scientist course, which teaches you how to engage and edit with Wikipedia articles. And then I did a ton of spreadsheety tasks like making shipping labels and doing all of that kind of thing. So to conclude, I want to give a big thank you to Nicole Schrody for being such an incredible mentor this summer, and to the rest of the public engagement team for being so welcoming and supportive. And thank you all for listening, and let me know if you have any questions.
Before we go into our last speaker, we have time for one question. Anyone? Yeah.
Did you look into why Taiwan is able to have a 10-fold increase? And is there anything there that you can then add to this program to improve it?
So I did. So it's interesting. The materials from the International Conference on Women in Physics, it's kind of a bit of a mess, to be honest with you, because it's all up to the individual countries. So the first thing that I looked at was this huge document. It was like 47 pages, and it was an abstract from each country that visited, saying like, this is what's going to be in our paper. And the range was absolutely astonishing. There were some papers that were super comprehensive, and they had numbers for like grad students, PhD, like faculty, research leaders, stuff like that. And there was one document that was just one sentence. It was like, it's better because I made it better. So like, it was really a wide scope. So then what I did afterward is I went in and read the individual papers from each country that participated to kind of like gauge the credibility and like what all was out there. I think that what's going on in Taiwan, if I remember correctly from their paper, is that they've just started putting more energy and focus towards gathering more participation in physics. And so I think it's like, not only are they seeing more female students in physics, they're seeing more physics students in general. And so I think it's like dedicated attention to increasing engagement, which then becomes a complicated question because countries like, if we go back, you can see US and United Kingdom, they're hovering around 20%. They have been for the past like 2 decades. And there's like dozens of initiatives that we have in the US and in the UK to try to increase female engagement, particularly at a high school level and undergrad level, and they haven't really seen any real increase. And so I think maybe what's going on in Taiwan is like, it's a start. So they've started having these initiatives, and so you're seeing like an initial spike. I think whether it continues going, it is something we'll have to look for.
Awesome. Please give it up for Amanda. Please give it up for our APS Education Programs intern, Raiden.
Good afternoon, everyone. I know it's been a long day, so thank you so much for sticking with us. Before I get into this last presentation, I think we should just give a hand to all the interns in their wonderful presentations today. You've heard their stories, you've seen their work, and I can honestly say that getting to live with and learn with and make memories with these amazing physicists and leaders of our future, it's been one of the great honors of my life so far. So I'm Raiden Wingate. I'm a rising senior at MIT, and today I'm going to be talking about personas, which is a cool new methodology used by APS to better understand its student members. So I had the pleasure of working with APS education programs this summer, and one of the things I really love about the organization is that they have a lot of programs not just for educators and departments, but for students. For example, you just heard Amanda talk about Physics Quest, which has a bunch of lessons and experiments to help introduce younger students into introductory physics content. And there's other programs like Impact, or the Industry Mentoring for Physicists, which connects undergrads and even postdocs with physicists who have experience in the industry. And one thing that APS wants to do to better develop and design and modify these programs is to have a better understanding of the students who will be a part of them. In the past, we've done a lot of this kind of research and outreach with educators. For example, there's some programs called EP3, which is to better design physics departments in a college or higher education setting. And for that, we use this methodology called personas, which is basically a persona is a character representing the typical member of a certain demographic. Here we have pictured a persona from HubSpot, which basically represents the typical member of the social media active audience. So here we have information like their age, their location, their interests, goals, and objectives. And we're able to do this with different demographics to understand some of the main patterns and commonalities and motivations of people that are in a certain demographic. So for APS, we've done this with K through 12 educators and professors and grad students. But one thing that we haven't done as much is doing this type of methodology with students. And there's a lot of benefits to having these interviews and these conversations with students, especially using personas in a way that there's an advantage over just having personal individual profiles. For example, if you had a personal profile, those are super helpful in getting to the specifics of a specific individual, but they are not necessarily as helpful as figuring out what makes someone tick that's similar to them, but not them. Personas take a lot of information from the larger demographics, so they allow you to generalize a little bit easier. Also, working with people, they're complex. They can be expensive sometimes to get a bunch of people in for every single part of the development process. So personas allow you to consolidate that a little bit more by having the entire demographic represented in one individual. And also, one more advantage that personas have over people is that people are scary. So instead of working with a profile of, let's say, Jaden or Caden or Raiden, we can use Braden. This is one of the 3 personas I've made. You can see there's information like the school they go to, what their major is, what their main goals are. And I was able to develop 3 of these personas based off of my interviews with people in this very room. So I interviewed 8 of the SPS interns, and it was a really fun experience because the data collection was literally just me talking to my friends. So you can't get much better than that. And one thing that I found really interesting about this is that before we got into the interviews, I had a very clear idea of what I wanted the categories of the personas to represent. And once I got into the interviews, I realized that was completely incorrect. For example, with the personas done with the educators, you can see that there's like one persona for professors, one persona for the K through 12 teachers, one persona for grad schools. And the personas were very status-based. The categories were based off of what they were doing. So I thought that the categories for this program would be very similar. So I had an idea of maybe we'll have a persona based off of physics student who wants to go to grad school, a physics student who doesn't want to go to grad school, or a non-physics student. And a couple things I realized is that, first of all, those categories literally represent every single person in the universe, so maybe the categories are a little bit too broad, but also there are, after talking to people and seeing what makes people click, that wasn't really the main distinguishing factor and what makes people similar, and what are the main target audiences within the larger college student physics demographic. So one thing that we found is that rather than categorize people by what they're doing or what their plans are, one thing that helped for the scope of this project was categorizing them based off of how they would specifically interact with APS resources, which is something we'll get into in just a second. But first, I want to say thank you to everyone who was able to help me go to the AAPT and PERC conference, especially the people who were able to help fund me with the SPS Reporter Award. I got to see Maya there, learn the dragonfly dance. Thank you for that. And I got to present on the very work I'm talking to you about right now. So without further ado, here are the personas that we worked on. So you've already seen Braden. He is our community-oriented student. So Braden would want to join APS Resources because he would want to find a community of students who are passionate about physics. There's also Alex, who's our outcome-oriented student, which is a student who might know exactly what they want to do. They might want to go into industry, or they might want to go into grad school. So they would join APS so that they can find resources that are tailor-made to helping them reach that end goal. And then we have Raina, who is our representation-oriented student, who is a student who might not know exactly what they want to do, but they would like to join APS so they can see all of these different opportunities represented to them, and maybe find a place where people who look like them or match their background can thrive within the physics community. So I want to do a little bit of an activity really quickly. So if you're a student or intern, I would love if you can look through these personas. And if you're old, if you are further along in your physics career, I'd love for you to think back on your time as an undergrad and think about which personas you would most identify with. So I'm going to name a persona, and I would love to see by a show of hands which ones you would most identify with. So does anyone here identify most with Braden? Does anyone identify most with Alex? And does anyone identify most with Raina? So we have a good amount of diversity here, but there's also some people that didn't raise their hand, which is important because with this stuff, you can't really get everyone, but it's important because that's where a lot of the improvements to this type of research can be made. So we're running a little bit out of time, so I won't go too deep into next steps unless you have questions about it. But what I just did is an example of member checking, which is a way to see which people are going to identify with which personas. And this can be very powerful because it can help drive students towards resources that are most useful for them. So one of the things that popped out of the interviews is that students don't know exactly what APS is or what resources are available to them because there's so much out there that it's hard to keep track. So if we do something like a survey where we find out which persona identifies the most with, we can then say, oh, this program would be really helpful for you. Or you might want to go to this physics profile section on the careers because this person had a very similar path to what you are projecting. So it's a really good way. I think Brad asked a question earlier about how to get these resources to be more available and more relevant to students. And there's some things that popped up in the interviews that didn't get mentioned, unfortunately. For example, we talked a lot about social media, which didn't pop up in the personas, but it's something that was very important in the scope of the interviews, especially figuring out how, especially in a world that's a lot more technologically active, how to make sure that we're getting the right information to people. So I would be happy to talk about that afterwards, but there's a lot of important insight that popped up from that. So to end our talk, I just want to show some of the favorite things that I was doing while I was procrastinating my blogs. Thank you. If so, I'd be happy to answer questions now, answer questions after the symposium, or if you want to get in contact with me, I have my emails here, and this is new, I have a LinkedIn now. So,
Thank you so much. Let's ask Raina a couple questions now. I'll make it there, but you can.
Hi, so I noticed that your 3 profiles all had students that went to universities that most people would consider to be like elite universities.
Yes.
How'd you make that choice? And like, I know that as a high school student who might have been going through those profiles, I probably would have had some feelings about that. I guess just any thoughts you might have.
Right.
about-
That's something that was very important and something that I didn't get to touch on at the next steps, but it is something that, so just the general population of people I interviewed, like these schools are all schools of people that I interviewed, and it just so happened that most of the people I interviewed happened to go to four-year universities to have like research opportunities that may not be available to all different schools. And one thing that would be a very important next step that we can take is that we can broaden the scope of this interview process and focus group process in order to include people with backgrounds that are more diverse. For example, we have people who go to community colleges or people who are going to more liberal arts backgrounds where STEM isn't the major focus. It just so happens that the majority of the people I interviewed did go to schools like that. And that's something that I couldn't really extrapolate. And it just goes to show that, like, even though there were a lot of benefits of interviewing my fellow cohort, it also had some limitations in that the background wasn't necessarily as diverse as the entirety of the college physics unit demographic.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Raiden. Now we're going to have our closing remarks by our director of SPS and Sigma Pi Sigma, Dr. Alejandro de la Puente.
Yeah, thank you. I didn't do anything.
PhD.
So I'll be quick. We all want to have lunch. First of all, thanks for your presentations. You know, when I go to a conference, I always enjoy what I enjoy the most is the questions, because that's where you learn a lot about your own project. I don't know how many of you know, but you know, we mark now the 25th year anniversary of this internship. Started off with great work by Jack Ken over there, who's a huge supporter of SPS, and it's been carried on over the years. Thank you, Jack. And it's been carried out over the years by people like Kayla, Michaela, Sasha, who's outside, Lydia, and of course Brad, who was the director before me, who, you know, I keep hearing a lot of things about, and I'm just trying to match myself to him, but I'll make it. So it's because of people like them that this happens. I came in late, and I was impressed by who I met the first day. We met here, and you building a spaghetti towers. That was insane. I think Bryn's team made some crazy I don't know what it was, but it was awesome. It stood the test of time. So I just tell you a little story. I did an internship when I was, I guess, a sophomore in my undergraduate time. And the way I found out about this internship is I was doing my biology lab, and my TA at the time, his research was listening to birds. So he would leave devices on forests. And his idea was that he will collect enough sounds of birds to create a digital library for the university of, in this case, Florida International University. And although I wasn't really interested in pursuing a degree in biology, I was a pre-med at the time, I just found the question so interesting. Like, he wanted to create a digital library of all, and this was before, you know, Google was taking off, a lot of things were taking off, but, you know, nobody could imagine where this could go. So I thought the question was interesting. I volunteered to just help him organize the recordings, and I learned a little bit about birds. I've learned a lot more about birds from my wife, who's an ecologist, but you know, I moved on after that. But what I did learn about that experience is that there's an interesting question pretty much everywhere you look, and it is accepting the challenge, whatever that is, that allows you to grow as a person, as a professional. So, you know, passion really drives innovation, and I'm sure this digital library is somewhere right now, and I'm sure it keeps evolving. But I know for a fact that although passion drives innovation and discovery, it is not sufficient. I think what makes it sufficient is, you know, your colleagues, your friends, your community, right? And I think that's what the SPS internship does. It sort of helps you catalyze new relationships, helps you meet people, in this case around DC, in your host agencies. And now I want to thank the host agencies, AIP, for taking a chance on these interns. What I saw today was amazing, and I'm sure it's going to contribute to the work you do. I just want to close with saying that what I saw in this internship program, and I'll get poetic now, I do like stream of consciousness, is a group of talented and energetic people who allowed each other to be supportive and supported, to share feelings and emotions, to be courageous in the face of adversity, and I know many of you had to deal with some of that while you were here, and to be funny and joyful, and we saw a little bit of that today. To be thoughtful and insightful, to be simple and yet complex, and to be a universe among other universes of unimaginable talent and potential. So I wish you luck in whatever you do next. So I hope this experience serves you well, but most of all, I hope most of you stay connected, because with time comes more complexity, and I guarantee you that you will all need each other one day, because we all need somebody sometimes, and you have each other now. So thank you so much, congratulations, please enjoy lunch, and good luck on everything.